Chapter 1, the 20th year. By the time the state road bent around the water tower and let the rails come into view, the sun had gone pewter, and Hallowfield Station sat in it like something set in a display case. Polished brick, a clock that had not told the truth since the last time the midnight train left, and a platform long enough to teach patience. I pulled into a gravel lot stitched with dandelions and parked between a truck with a feed store logo and a sedan someone loved enough to keep waxed. The wind smelled like creosote and rain that couldn't decide. Inside, the ticket hall was both renovated and not. Fresh paint over old moldings, polished benches that still remembered chewing gum and worry. On the west wall, 3 brass plaques hung like apologies. 1985, 2005. Empty rectangles where 2025 would go if the town still believed in plaques. The man at the station master's window had the tidy combed hair of a person who respected clocks and the eyes of someone who had watched too many strike the wrong hour. His name tag said Asher. His voice said 65, stubborn. "You're late by Hallowfield standards, Miss Quinn," he said as if we'd met. "Avery," I said. "I'm only late if the station clock is right." He followed my gaze. The hands, black, proper, pointed to 10:38 when my phone said 1:12. Asher's mouth tipped at one corner. "It's accurate every 20th year," he said. "The week the train comes. Tonight it'll catch up by itself and then keep exact time until the door's shut. Then it will take the penalty for all of us." I let my bag down gently. "You've seen that happen 3 times." He slid a ledger through the slot, a dignity move rather than a necessity, and motioned me toward the side gate. "Come on. You'll want the platform and the wind. We talk better outside." Hallowfield's platform was poured concrete with a lip of oil where men who missed the era of steam put their memories. The rails curved away to the north, a mile-long sightline that ended in trees and a low trestle where crows held their meetings. I set my case on the bench, opened it, and laid out what my old colleagues at the Bureau used to call superstitions and I call redundancies. A pair of small geophones that listen for Wilhelm in the rail itself, a roll of surveyor's chalk to write across the head of steel, 3 battery-powered tape recorders with fresh cassettes, a spool of neon kite line that can pay out a mile without snapping, a Polaroid camera, because the last time someone swore a phenomenon hated film, they were right. Asher watched with a calm I recognized, someone who has done drills so many times he's learned to respect other people's. "The town hates it when we call you Lot," he said, not unkindly. "They say it makes the train angry." "I've never met an angry vehicle," I said. "Only angry people. You might get promoted tonight." A door behind us opened on a rush of coffee smell, and a woman's voice that had learned to rule rooms without raising itself. "You'll eat, both of you, or you'll be no good at midnight." The woman carried a thermos and a paper bag, like a sacristan bringing sacrament. Her name was Marta Reyes, and her apron said Griddle and Shine, which I learned was the diner across from the feed store. She tucked a foil-wrapped sandwich into my hand before I could protest. "You're the investigator? From the federal place." "I left the federal place," I said. "Now I work for people who don't want to end up on their evening news." "Then you'll like our evening," she said, and nodded toward the rails. "It doesn't show up even when the cameras work." A teenager slouched against the far post, hoodie up despite the warmth, marker in his hand, trapping a groove in the paint, but not daring to write. He stared at me the way kids do with adults they've decided are about to be either villains or proof. "You think you'll stop it?" he asked. His name, I'd learn later, was Ezra. He had a sister who lived in his pocket like a promise and parents who refused to let her set the table for a ghost. "I don't know if it can be stopped," I said, "but I can measure it. Sometimes that changes what a thing wants to be." "Rail Mary says it's a mercy," he muttered. "Rail Mary," Marta said, rolling her eyes in a way that still respected other people's beliefs. "She sells flowers shaped like trains and candles that smell like old timetables. She'll be here by dusk, and she'll tell you it takes only those who want to go." "And you?" I asked. Marta stared down the line until the rails did that shimmering mirage trick steel does when it wants to pretend to be water. "I think the world has clever ways to punish despair," she said. "And this is one of them." Asher checked his watch against the station clock and then against a pocket watch old enough to have personality. He led me toward the signal bungalow, a square, beige box near the trelline that houses the electronics that keep trains from arguing. He had the key. Of course he did. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled of dust and number 10 wire. A logbook sat on a metal shelf, tidy as a priest. He laid it open. 1985, written by a neat hand in black ink. Occupied block with no axle count. 2005, written in pencil by a man in a hurry. False clear /F7 dropped to dark /bell failure. In each case, a 9-minute blackout on the recording. No clock in there ever lost time. It just forgot for 9 minutes that anything existed. Clocks behave weirdly when electricity lies, I said. Clocks behave weirdly when people lie, Asher countered, and pointed to a page with a manifest, names written before anyone admitted to selling tickets. People put themselves on lists for things even they don't think they'll do. We walked the platform back and forth until I could feel its slope in my calves. I knelt by the head of the rail and chalked across it every 10 feet, little white lines like notches you cut when you want to see if something's moved while your back was turned. I set the geophones and ran their leads to a cheap analog oscillograph with a pen that inks a wiggly line across graph paper. I taped one recorder under the bench and another under the lip of the platform next to the yellow safety line. The third I put in my pocket with hard candy and a backup battery and the number of a woman I would like to stop worrying. A tremor went through the platform, the kind a truck makes 2 streets over. I looked up, chastened for believing the thing might announce itself with drums. Someone else had come down the steps. A woman in her 30s with a backpack meant for field work and a dress that had survived one too many laundromats. She had her hair in a braid and a way of nodding that acknowledged her own plan without subjecting me to it. "You're Avery Quinn," she said. "I read your thing about the crossing that was haunted by a software update." "If by haunted you mean murdered by denial, yes." She laughed once, grateful. "I'm Lena Strand. My mother boarded in 2005. She said it without tears. The absence hung like a rail in the air. "I'm not here to get her back." She looked down the line. "I'm here to see if not knowing hurts less than knowing." "They told me passengers are never seen again," I said. "They also told me grief is linear," she said. "We'll see who's lying." We stood, 2 women and a town, the rails pulling our eyes north. The afternoon softened. A boy on a BMX rode the length of the sidewalk, stood on his pedals, coasted as if rolling now might be practice for something. A sheriff's cruiser idled on the bridge. A presence, not a plan. And over it all, the clock's stubborn wrongness like a refrain. At 5, Ezra came back with a bunch of flowers he hadn't bought and stuck them in the ash can like a middle finger to tragedy. Marta brought coffee that had learned to forgive. Asher took a long yellow envelope out of a locked drawer and bashed it against his palm like a man sneaking up on courage. "It's the old conductor's punch," he said. "Found it in a desk after the 1985 departure. Nobody claims it belongs to Hallowfield. It doesn't look like ours, never did. But," he added, and showed me the steel jaw with its little star-shaped tooth. "Every 20 years, the punch mark matches the ticket stubs people save from before the train ever arrives." "You think there's a conductor," I said. "The same every time." "I think there is a man on the platform who knows the word last better than anyone should," Asher said. "And the fewer nouns I give that, the better I sleep." I ate Marta's sandwich sitting on the edge of the platform the way children are taught not to. Lena picked up my kite spool and tested the brake. "That goes on the coupler, yes? And you tell yourself you'll yank it before you go too far." "I tell myself the line will tell me which direction the truth pulls," I said. "The rest is improvisation. And if the truth pulls straight down, then we move the memorial plaques inside," I said, "where it's warm." As the sky went toward violet and the peepers started up in the ditch beyond the trestle, townspeople arrived in 1s and 2s, and the pattern I've learned to see: 5% believers, 30% cynics, the rest citizens who keep their schedules because that's how you stay alive. A preacher in a sport coat shook hands without asking anyone to do anything they didn't already mean. A woman with a clipboard wrote water, blankets, tea on a sheet, and did not write body bags because the last time someone did that, the train came 10 minutes early. At 9, I walked the curve beyond the station and knelt by the trestle. The wood planks complained like old teeth. It was a small bridge, and a good one. On the far side, 50 yards past the county sign, the rails ended. Terminated. Removed in 2012 when the timber yard moved and the state didn't want to maintain a track that went nowhere. I had photos from satellite maps and a memo from the department. Yet every 20 years a train left Hallowfield toward a place the rails no longer go. Back at the platform, Asher checked the station clock against his pocket watch and then against the sky. The brass hands shuddered and moved. 2 minutes, 5, 8, fast-forwarding their own guilt until they matched the top of the hour. The sound they made was not a chime. It was a child turning the hands of their parents' watch and then putting it back where it belonged. "You're not going to talk me out of it," Lena said, as if I'd tried. "I'm not going to talk anyone into or out of anything," I said. "I'm going to put one more instrument where instruments have a right to be." "Where?" "In the vestibule." I patted the tape recorder in my pocket, the kind you have to press with your thumb until it clicks and the wheels turn. "If a door opens." Lena's eyes flicked to the north, the way everyone's did, the moment the rails hummed. Not sound. Not yet. The hum in the bones, steel talking to steel down a line of bolted plates. The geophones began scribbling on my paper like anxious insects. Marta, who does not care about ghosts and refuses to be impressed by engineering, put her hand on my forearm, and I could feel the tremor in her skin. Asher breathed in and out once, deliberate. "An hour," he said. "Maybe less." He set the old conductor's punch on the lip of the ticket window like a ritual. "You have time to call anyone who needs to hang up on you." I didn't call anyone. I checked the chalk lines at every 10 feet and wrote new ones. I tied the kite line around a cast iron bollard and ran the free end through my palm until the friction burned sense into my skin. I wrote the number 0 on the empty brass plaque for 2025 and then wiped it off with my sleeve because I don't like tempting nouns. "This is our train," Ezra said, soft and fierce as prayer. "Tonight it's our train," I said. "Tomorrow it belongs to the people who don't sleep." The clock's minute hand moved, obedient now. The town exhaled. The rails hummed. And somewhere down the line, around a curve whose geometry I had measured, a headlight that had no source decided to exist. Chapter 2, The Manifest. By 11, the platform was full and quiet the way stages are full and quiet before the curtain. Sheriff Lawton had posted his deputies at either end of the platform with the kind of posture that says we are here to be seen, not to win. A man with a harmonica played 2 notes and put the thing back in his pocket when the air protested. The crows on the trestle left, all at once, as if they'd gotten a memo. The hum in the rail became sound in the nose, then the teeth, then the ear. Metal on metal, measured and far. It did not match the schedule of a freight. It did not match the breath of wind or the heartbeat of the town's only factory when its compressors kick in. It was the 4-beat meter of a heavy consist running on well-kept track. "Except there isn't any," Lena murmured. She had put her hand in the pocket of her jacket and found, I suspected, a note she had written herself to throw away if she came back. The kite line lay coiled at our feet like a tame snake waiting for a job. I ran it through the carabiner on my belt because plans that don't include a way to cut loose are not plans. They're fantasy. A pale glow showed through the trees at the curve. It grew like a dawn in miniature, then brightened the way modern lights don't. Corona around a bulb, not LEDs, not fluorescence, a warmer, older thermodynamic. The smell came next, hot metal, brake dust, a whiff of ozone that made the hair on my arms take a vote. The station's lights flicked once, on, off, on, in a ripple that traveled the length of the platform. The clock ticked, guilty, and the rails, God help me, sang. The headlight rounded the trees and threw our shadows the wrong way. There was a locomotive there where none should be, black as a sentence, with a silver banding at the nose and a number board in white. 1133. Behind it, 3 coaches with long windows and the kind of lettering you see in films about a more elegant version of the same bad decisions. Midland and Ohio said the sides. though that line had died before I did my first case. The cars shone like someone had loved them daily for years with lemon oil. Their trucks, wheels, and springs pressed the rails like a fact I could measure. The engine hissed, and the brakes squealed, and the platform accepted a weight that creaked the bolts in the stanchions. My chalk lines disappeared under steel. My geophones danced. "It's real," Ezra whispered, furious with relief. The locomotive halted with its nose past the station clock and the first car's doors at our feet. The brass handles were polished. The vestibule traps were down, the steps out. The marquee lamps over the doors burned a soft, domestic gold. A man stood in the vestibule, gloved, in an old-fashioned uniform that looked like the museum version until you saw the scuffs where a sleeve knows elbows. He was not young and not old, and not anything I could have predicted except inevitable. His cap had a badge with the same number as the locomotive. He held a punch with a star tooth like the one on Asher's counter. When he spoke, his voice was the noise rail makes when it's not trying to frighten you. "Tickets, please." The platform stirred, and then held itself still out of respect for the sentence. No one had bought a ticket. They never do. But people reached into purses and inside pockets and pulled out rectangles of card as if retrieving a note they had written 20 years ago. Marta put her hand over her mouth when one of her regulars, a man who brought his wife the wrong muffins with a smile that made it right, took a ticket out of his wallet with the seriousness of a will. Sheriff Lawton did nothing correctly. Asher folded his hands on the marble lip of his window and scowled like a man trying to remember whether a fight would make a thing bigger or smaller. The conductor, there is no other word, took a breath like a man who has learned the cost of generosity. He lifted a small bound book I recognized from photographs, a manifest, the old railway kind, linen-bound, with lines meant for fountain pen and a margin for total count. He read, not loudly, enunciating as if reading the names were in itself a courtesy. "Mr. Raymond Evers," he said, and a man I would have believed was a Raymond stepped forward. The conductor examined the ticket as if examining a jewel, punched it with a click that matched the star on Asher's punch, and handed it back. "Coach C," he said, and touched 2 fingers to the brim of his cap. "Ms. Joan Mallory." A woman with careful hair and a practical coat. "Coach B." "Mr. Pete Corsguard," a man whose shoes had learned to endure. "Coach A." "Ms. Lena Strand." Lena's name snagged the air like a zipper catching thread. She swallowed once. "I didn't, there isn't." She put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a ticket with her name in a careful serif, a date, and a departure time that matched the clock now that the clock had remembered decency. The paper was thick and soft and expensive in the way only the past is. The conductor glanced at it with no surprise at all. "Coach B," he said softly. "Mid-car. West window." "My mother liked west windows," she said before she could stop herself. "They are good for watching things you intend to leave," he said, with a kindness that made me develop a new hatred for kindness. She looked at me. I didn't lift a hand. I wouldn't have known whether to pull or wave. She stepped up. He took her ticket and did not touch her fingers. She vanished into the vestibule like stepping into the next word of a long sentence. The light held. Marta squeezed my wrist. "You're letting her." "I'm not in charge of verbs tonight," I said, and my voice tried to forgive me. The conductor continued reading. He knew every name, whether it was written in his book or in him. People stepped forward, handed tickets they had not bought, and boarded like they were stepping into rule rather than exception. One man tried to hand his to Sheriff Lawton, and the sheriff did the bravest thing I have seen a man do that didn't involve fire. He stepped back and let the ticket go where its noun belonged. "Ezra Greeley," the conductor said, and the boy startled like a bird hitting glass. He looked at me, at Marta, at Asher. Marta shook her head minutely, not because she owned him, but because she had learned to save men she could still reach. Ezra patted his hoodie as if a ticket might have grown there while his back was turned. His hands came up empty. The conductor's face didn't change. He moved his pencil down the page and read another name. Ezra sat. He cried once. He wiped his eye as if erasing a drawing. "Tickets, please," the conductor said again, ritual making a room out of repetition. "Mr. Lionel Asher." The station master's jaw worked. He did not reach for a pocket he did not have. "I am on duty," he said, evenly. "I know," the conductor said, "and this is not your duty." "I choose it anyway." The conductor nodded once, as if conceding a small game and letting the player have the win. He did not call Asher again. He turned a page neat. I edged closer to the vestibule while he worked, because I am more stubborn than I am polite. I could smell the car beyond him. Wool and disinfectant and hot metal and a lemon polish someone had applied with a weary cloth. I could see the patterned carpet in a color that had gone out of fashion when cigarettes did. I slid my hand along the jamb and tucked the little tape recorder under the lip of the step in a place a boot would not find. My thumb pressed the red button until the wheel turned and the little window showed motion. When I looked up, the conductor was watching me with an expression that did not add censure, even though it could have. "You may keep your souvenir," he said, as if to a tourist with a camera. "It won't keep you." "I prefer evidence to souvenirs," I said. "Everyone does," he said, until they hear it played back. A breeze came up the platform and threw one strand of hair into my mouth. I spat it out like temperament. "Where does this go?" I asked. "On," he said, with a shrug that was not cruel. "We have never tried to make it kinder by naming it. People call it mercy," I said. "People call many things a train," he replied. He turned the page again, and I smelled his gloves, clean cotton, starch, time. "Ms. Avery Quinn." It felt, for a moment, like someone had opened a hatch in my chest and let a cold koan fall in. I did not. He did not smirk. He did not oblige me by being wicked. He inclined his head the smallest increment. "Not everything we choose we buy," he said gently. He gestured toward my jacket pocket. The weight there was not new and was not familiar. I reached in and pulled out a rectangle of cardstock with my name, spelled correctly, and the number 1133 and the word midnight in black. The paper smelled like every ticket I had ever saved and said I didn't. A little star-shaped punch mark already sat in the corner. "I haven't boarded," I said. My voice went a little strange, as if I were hearing it through glass. "You haven't yet," he said, and for the first time I understood the verb tense of a trap. He offered me the book. In neat writing you could have cut with a knife. Quinn, Avery, right where it should be alphabetically, and right where it had not been half a second before. Behind me, Marta said, "No, not a shout. A sentence." Behind her, Asher said, "Dear job, Miss Quinn." Behind both of them, Lena turned in the doorway of Coach B and looked at me through glass that I was not sure the platform would respect. "You wanted to measure it," she said. "What will you measure if you don't go where it measures?" Ezra stood, then, like a volunteer at a fire, and put a hand on my sleeve with the gentleness of someone who has learned what not to ask for. "Tie the line to your belt," he said, and oh God, I loved him for turning the myth into a boy's plan. "If it pulls, you'll know." The conductor did not object. He had the patience of a profession that knows late trains and late apologies. "Last call," he said, not loudly, but in a tone that made my kneecaps consider obedience. "Tickets, please." My kite line looked very bright in the station lights. Ridiculous, neon. A dare to a night that preferred older colors. I fed it through the carabiner, set the brake. I tucked the ticket into my pocket with the recorder's spare battery and a list of questions that were quickly becoming decoration. The conductor waited with his hands at his sides, the book in one, the punch in the other, a man who had learned how to be an exit. "Avery," Marta said softly, like a woman on a platform in another century to somebody else. "This isn't your stop." "Tonight it might be no one's," I said, and put my hand on the rail. "Where does it go?" I asked the conductor again, because repetition is a way to test a lie. "On," he said, and the way he said it was both map and mercy. I lifted my foot to the step. The kite line came alive. The station clock took a breath. And somewhere down the platform, a boy began to count without meaning to, because mankind has always believed in the power of sevens. Chapter 3, Coach B, West Window. I took the step as if the riser might revoke itself halfway. The vestibule had the familiar geometry of older coaches. Narrow, competent, its doors folding with an accordion sigh, the rubber diaphragm between cars smelling faintly of raincoats. A brass scuff plate under my toe wore the ghost of a logo no one had polished out because you can't remove a memory with a rag. I felt the car's weight in my knees, the way floors declare themselves. This was not dream physics. It had mass and manners. "Coach V," the conductor said, not unkindly, as if he were placing a book on the right shelf. Up close, he had a face that had learned to stop being handsome without becoming cruel. The cap's badge read 1133 in enamel, the numerals as indifferent as house numbers. Lena waited 3 rows in, west side, her hand on the window post like an anchor. The seat upholstery was a blue-green pattern that remembered 1,000 shoes and 3 decades of lemon oil. People had already paired themselves with their absence in the way certain waiting rooms teach you to do, without instructions. A woman folded a paper she hadn't brought and slid it into a pocket that did not have one. A man in a suit older than the station clock sat with both hands on his knees and watched the aisle as if the aisle might apologize. I took the seat across from Lena, aisle between. "I'm here as an observer," I said, as if that verb carried jurisdiction. "That's what everyone says," she said, and half smiled to keep the sentence from bruising. The west window gave us the platform in a long plate glass lens. The station clock loomed sincere again. Marta stood with her arms folded, so she wouldn't spend her hands cheaply. Ezra had climbed onto the bollard where my line ran and wrapped both palms around the neon cord, as if he could teach it reason. Asher stood at his window with the conductor's punch under his hand, a talisman and a dare. I thumbed my pocket recorder on an old habit and spoke low so I'd recognize myself later. "Quinn, Avery. On board Coach B of Consist labeled Midland and Ohio 1133. Doors open. Platform in view. Sensations ordinary. Air temperature slightly cooler than platform by 2 degrees, guessing. West window provides normal refraction. Smell? Brake dust. Disinfectant. Lemon oil. Audio. Low hum. Not generator. Bearing noise? I stopped because language was the wrong tool for what touched the bones then. It wasn't motion. It was the knowledge that motion was about to be. Every backed-up parade, every caught breath before a dive, every orchestra when the bow is just off the string and the conductor's hand isn't a gesture yet. A faint tick under my palm where the armrest met the seat frame, as if somewhere in the undercarriage a relay was deciding whether it had faith. The conductor walked the aisle, counting without counting, the way men who work in cars learn to tally souls. Coach, half, quarter, door. He stopped by us and spoke in a tone that predated customer service and outlived civility. At the tone, he said, nodding toward the station clock, "We'll close vestibules. Doors cannot be reopened until the clear. If you intend to remain on the platform, now is the moment." "Where's the clear?" I asked. The corner of his mouth admitted a secret without offering one. "On." "You keep saying that." "It keeps being true," he said and moved on, touching the backs of seats with 2 fingers as if reminding Pine and batting to take care of their people. Behind him, a man I recognized from the manifest, Raymond Evers, a broad chest tired of carrying itself, lifted his ticket and studied the punch mark like an omen. "Does it hurt?" he asked nobody. "No," said the woman across from him. "Practical code, hair with history. But it doesn't forgive." Lena looked at my belt, and the neon line clipped through the carabiner. "Are you really going to test it like a kite?" She wasn't mocking. She wanted the world to be as simple as things you can spool and break. I need to know whether the pull is acceleration, gravity, or theater. I put my palm against the window. The glass was real, cool, uninterested in my pulse. A chime rang, low, domestic, like the 2-note gallantries trains used before they acquired voices that sound like fines. The vestibule doors folded with an airtight exhale. 1, 2, 3, along the car. The conductor looked forward down the aisle, the way a person listens to judgment announced at the far end of a courtroom. Somewhere, in Coche, a child cried once, caught, and stopped, the sound a person makes when they realize they're still permitted to breathe. I glanced sideways. Outside, Marta leaned nearer to Ezra, and I saw her lips form count. He nodded, closed his eyes, trusting that taking one sense away would teach his fingers honesty, and began, not in sevens, but in ones, because he is young enough to know that numbers are truer when you touch each one. The train did not lurch. It did not heave. It slid, imperceptibly, from expectation to execution, the way certain truths do when they decide to stop being polite. A low vibration found the seat frames. The west window began to trolley the platform past us at the speed of a decision. Ezra's mouth moved with numbers, and his hands did a brave thing you cannot teach. They did not clutch. My kite line paid out with silken malice. No jerk, no snag, just a smooth surrender like fishing line on a good drag. I set the brake another third turn. The line still fed itself to the world beyond. Quinn, I murmured into the little recorder. Motion is linear, smooth, 15 inches per second initial, increasing. Acceleration feels constant, perhaps a yard per second squared. No lateral wag. Sound. I swallowed. The pen behind the conductor's ear made a little click. That was all. Sound is present but damped, as if the air has been asked to keep its voice down. Lena had her forehead against the window now, the way you do when you don't want sense to get between your eyes and an event. My mother said she could still see the town for a while, she said. For how long? I kept my voice even. We barter kindness in tone when we can't buy it in outcomes. 9 minutes, she said. She never wrote me letters, but the neighbor did. She lasted 9 minutes before the sight of what she was leaving got small enough to put away. Signal Bungalow recorded 9-minute block blackouts. I said. 1985, 2005. Then we have 9 minutes to look behind us, she said, and pressed her hand flat to the glass. Hallowfield slid past as if the car boy had pushed the town along a track and not the other way around. Marta lifted her hand to shoulder height and kept it there, a small human metronome keeping my courage on time. Asher's face stayed in the window of his booth. He had locked his jaw around his duty and was solving it with the patience that makes old men necessary. Sheriff Lawton stood with his hat off. Never a bad decision. The crows on the trestle watched with the manners of judges. The rails out beyond that point I had walked it ended. The train did not intend to pretend. The line on my hip paid itself into the world like an apology. I watched the numbers I'd sharpened on the last 500 feet, the way you keep an eye on oxygen in a dive. Ezra mouthed 91, 92, and I felt my body give my brain back to me just long enough to wonder whether a boy counting for me was the most dangerous thing we'd do tonight. The coach brightened faintly, not more light, a shift in temperature, like crossing an isotherm. The air had a different salt, not ocean.
Tears.
I smelled starch. Pipe tobacco no one dared anymore, the citrus of old polishes. The man called ever sat back with his eyes closed and let his mouth soften, the way people do when they walk into rooms and recognize a furniture arrangement that made them someone they meant to stay. We're past the trestle, Lena said. Her fingers curled. The glass did not oblige by warming. We shouldn't be. We often are, I said, because the wrong sort of comfort is sometimes better than silence. There was no jolt, no clever derailment that proved the world tougher than mystery. The rails in the window simply continued, good steel, well spiked, ballast tidy, into woods I had driven that afternoon and found only scrub and old ties. The treeline parted in an order I would swear was new. The sky kept its color. The air did not creak with cinema thunder. The train went on. 9 minutes is a long time when you spend it with your eyes committed to not lying. I heard my recorder's will were like a nervous tick. The conductor stood by the rear vestibule, watching the platform retreat to the size of sentiment, his hands quiet. He did not check his watch. He did not say tickets. He let the train do the sentence it had learned. Why the schedule? I asked. Why 20 years? Because people need time, he said, and it was not an answer. Because a thing like this can't be explained to administrations. Because some machines are kind to bureaucrats by making themselves too inconvenient to get defunded. Because 20 years is how long it takes some grief to grow legs. You don't have to talk like a priest, I said. I don't, he said. I have to talk like a conductor. The difference is pants.
I admit he laughed.
The boy 2 rows ahead exhaled a shaky sound that might have been relief at adults still degrading sacredness for sport. The air temperature shifted again, cooler, then warmer, then correct. The west window no longer showed Hallowfield. It showed pine, and an old river doing its patient carve, and a water tower painted a blue I had not seen this morning, because it did not exist this morning in this color. 9, Lena whispered, counting with Ezra, who could not hear her. 9. She pressed her mouth into a line. She shouldn't have gone. Do you want to get off? I asked. No, she said, and surprised both of us. I want to know how long it takes not to. The conductor tipped his head forward, the smallest bow. Doors are shut, he said, as the station clock, far behind us now, would have struck the minute no one respects until a train tells them to. You may move about the cars. He didn't say you may never leave. I would have come apart if he had. He didn't say you were safe. I wouldn't have believed him. He put his hand on the back of the seat across from me and waited, as if the train needed consent more than ceremony. We rolled on with our small nouns tucked safe on our laps. Ticket, line, recorder, grief. I stood. The line at my hip tugged the way loyalty does. Ezra must have shifted his grip. I tested the brake. Still true. Back in a minute. I told Lena, like you do in rooms when you owe somebody dignity. Don't go anywhere. Where would I go? She said, and tilted her head at the window. On, I said, and moved toward the vestibule and the dark diaphragm between cars, because you must put your feet into the articulation of a train to understand it. The rubber bellows sighed against my shoulder. The plates thudded softly underfoot at their own metronome. Coach glowed with that late-night hush that lives in sleeper cars and maternity wards. People sat with their names. No one slept. A young man leaned his head against the seat back in front and said, "I'm sorry," to its vinyl in a tone that meant the sentence would never be finished properly. The door to the front vestibule was shut. I knew with the same instinct that tells you when a dog isn't to be touched that it wouldn't open. I turned back toward B and past the galley. A woman in a white jacket poured hot water into paper cups and started 4 tea bags without asking anyone what they liked. She met my look with the mutual respect that passes between service and service. "You feed?" I asked, nodding at the cups.
"When I can," she said.
She had flour on her cuff from a day that didn't belong to this train, and hair that had known a hairnet and forgotten it. "When we have water." "Where do you get water?" "On," she said, as if I'd asked where language comes from. "How long?" I stopped because asking a person in a car how long they have been in that car is either cruel or foolish. She saved me. "Long enough to become good at exactly one recipe," she said. She handed me a cup. It tasted like chamomile and metal. "You're the one with the string." "Kite line," I said. "You could call it love," she said. "It behaves the same when you pull." Back in Coach B, the west window had found a rhythm of landscape that suggested we were not crossing a map so much as rehearsing it. A siding flashed by with a hand-painted sign Mercy over a feed dealer's door. A depot with a cupola that made my scalp itch with junior high memories. A stretch where the ballast shone like it had been sifted by somebody who cared.
Isette.
Lena didn't speak. I let her keep the silence, because that's one thing I can afford. The line at my belt tugged again, steady, not a plea, but a pulsing insistence. I set the brake another quarter. The spool ticked in my hip, paying out so cleanly it felt like morals do in books you read when you're too tired to be complicated. When the conductor came back, he had his manifest under his arm the way preachers carry books to keep their hands faithful. "We do not return," he said softly, so softly I could pretend the sentence applied only to timetables. "But you may step down before the dark." "What dark?" I asked. "The part of the run without windows," he said, and because I am not a fool, I believed him. "How long?" "Long enough to decide," he said, which was worse. I looked at my watch. It told me an hour had gone by when 10 minutes had. I could hear my recorder turning and wondered what, exactly, one captures with a microphone when a train refuses to admit geography. The car breathed, one exhale per rail length, the way good rolling stock does when the springs remind the body it's not on the ground anymore but won't let it forget. 9 minutes had passed somewhere earlier. 9 minutes would come again. I put my palm flat to the glass to feel what the world was doing without asking my eyes to tell me lies. It was cool and true and indifferent. "Where is Coach C?" I asked him, because questions keep me from buying tickets in the names of bad ideas. "Behind us," he said, and almost smiled. "There isn't a D. Not tonight. And there won't be an A tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed, with a kindness that applied to no one and nothing in particular. He moved on, efficient, the way men who have learned fairness move, without haste, without indulgence. He checked the latches, as if even here the brass did not merit neglect. He paused by Ezra's empty seat. The boy had stayed on the platform. Touched the back lightly with 2 fingers, and then did nothing at all, which is sometimes the only way to respect a child. "Miss Quinn," Lena said, and I saw the whites around her irises the way people get when they've hit the tempo change in their decisions. "What happens if we decide at the same time?" "Then we're a crowd and the rules will be what crowds are," I said, and wished I'd brought better nouns. "If we don't, then the car will let one more indignity pass without making a speech." "I don't think this car likes speeches," she said. "It doesn't," I said. I checked. We went on. That was the chapter. It wasn't cleverer than that. The real work lay in the part of the run without windows, where the conductor's voice had gone when he said it, and mine would have to remember nouns instead of pity. My cup had cooled. The recorder turned. The kite line whispered at my hip with the steadiness of a heart you choose to believe is yours. Outside, the world the window offered stayed coherent. That was the worst part. If it had sprouted antlers or cracks, if wolves had paced us, if saints had risen from switch stands, I would have been relieved. Instead, there were farms and an old brick kiln and a church with a cardboard notice board and a boy carrying a tackle box along a ditch, someone I recognized not at all, because people don't always exist to star in other people's horror shows. At the doorway between cars, the diaphragm breathed once like a sleeping animal accepting company. The conductor lifted a hand, rolled his wrist, a gesture somewhere between steady and now. The coach dimmed 1 degree, the color of hospital curtains and proper offices, and I understood that windows were a privilege, and we were about to be asked to speak to a room without any. "Is this where people disappear?" I asked. "They don't disappear," he said. "They stop being seen by the same people. It's a different sentence." "I don't like it," I said. "You don't have to," he said. The line at my hip tugged once. Not urgent, true. I pinched the brake another quarter turn and stood, because there are things you do when you're about to tell an unkind truth. "Ezra's counting," I said. "If I get stupid, he'll feel it." "I have never known a boy named Ezra who couldn't count," the conductor said, and the coach light softened. "Prepare to decide." The car exhaled. The windows didn't darken. They stopped being windows. The glass went to mirror, a very old trick. The west side of Coach B offered back our ghosts, row on row. A car full of faces with the platform behind their eyes. Somewhere, a man finally sobbed and did not disguise it. Lena took 1 step into the aisle and then back again, as if mapping a room that refuses to be drawn. The recorder purred like a cheap cat. The kite line hummed through my belt loop with the world's most courteous threat. "On," the conductor said, as if that word were a prayer, and the coach did what it had apparently been built to do since before I was born. We kept moving. I closed my eyes and listened for a sound the world would call a sign. There wasn't one. There was only a train doing its job, and the small, strong voice that people carry for somebody else when the glass stops, letting them pretend they're just riding. I held it. That was all. It was almost enough. Chapter 4. Past the trestle. On the platform, the world kept its habits with obstinate decency, which is to say it pretended to be ordinary until pretending became too much like work. 86, Ezra whispered, palms under the line, forearms tucked to keep his skin from burning. His hoodie sleeves had 2 shiny channels where the neon had taught them humility. Marta kept 1 hand on his shoulder, the other on the brake Avery had explained fast and twice. Quarter turn, count, quarter turn, breathe. The spool ticked with that sated confidence good hardware gets when it knows the job is within its range. The cord fed east toward the curve, then north, toward the tree line, then on a direction that doesn't exist on maps. Asher stood with one elbow on the marble, the old conductor's punch under his palm, and the radio pressed to his ear. Not because he needed a dispatcher. No one could dispatch this, but because the human voice on the other end made the air thicker and less likely to betray him. Sheriff Lawton walked the edge of the platform like a man patrolling an idea. He had a pair of bolt cutters under one arm. No plan, a habit, and the look of somebody who had seen enough barn fires to know you haul water, even if the roof's already gone. Two deputies stood a car length apart with their hats in their hands, the uniforms of men who don't intend to mistake ceremony for usefulness. 100, Ezra said. He didn't smile. He didn't look down the track. His eyes were shut tight. 101. He let the numbers find him. That way he didn't have to invent any. Rail Mary arrived late, as usual. Plastic trains on wire sticks in a cluster like lilies, candles in a tote bag, a rosary wound around her wrist like a festival bracelet. She stopped 2 body lengths shy of the boy and the line, because she has a cooperative understanding with grief. You shouldn't let a child hold the whole town, she said to Marta.
He's not, Marta said.
He's holding one person. That's the only work any of us ever get in a night. Mary made the sign of the cross half the old way, half the way people who have sinned against the church make it out of habit and stubbornness. I brought the white candles, she said, for people who went because they wanted to, and the blue ones for the ones who thought the platform was a trap. We're not lighting them, Marta said. We're counting. Mary set the tote by the pillar and took up a post, thin shoulders squared. I can count, she said simply, and began, eyes open, mouth shut, numbers in her throat like a discipline. Down by the trestle, a pair of teenagers with fishing poles stood on the tie ends and watched the rails the way kids watch drinks fizz. The crows came back, 5 of them, and regarded the line with an academic interest. The sky had the sheen tin roofs get before heat breaks. The air beneath the platform carried the rotor whisper you only hear when a very cool thing is very near. 137. Ezra said, voice hoarse. You can brake, Marta murmured. We can hook the bollard. You can shake out your hands. It helps to know it's still there, he said, the odd, doomed wisdom of the very young. If it stops being there, I'll still have it in my hands if I don't let go. It won't stop, she said, and called herself a liar in her head so the house of honesty would not fall down around the boy. A hush traveled the platform from west to east, not a sound but an agreement to make less of one. The station clock broke and healed itself one last time. The town's processors and compressors and air conditioners, the civic hum, kept humming. A train thrum nobody else could claim rode under it all. The rails shone with a voltage the engineer from the grain co-op, who had come to be wrong in public like a gentleman, swore wasn't his. 180, Ezra said. Rail Mary, eyes on the curve, said, we're past the trestle. We've been. Asher said, not to outdo, just to make the truth into something that couldn't be argued with. At the signal bungalow, the old relay chattered, found a platonic ideal of true for 9 seconds, went dark for 9 full minutes like a church that has chosen to be empty on purpose, then came back with a subdued, I was here the whole time. The logbook's pencil, uncapped and waiting, lay across the page like a patient instrument. No one picked it up. Writing during the 9 minutes felt like eating in the aisle during a funeral. 2:05, Ezra breathed. Sweat ran into the curve of his lips and made a salt. He didn't lick it off. If he moved his mouth, he might say something that would make the line less brave. I can take it, Sheriff Lawton said, voice turned down. We can clip it to the bollard and take the strain. He's got it, Marta said. And then, because generosity is not a finite substance, and she had exactly 1 spare in her body, hook it anyway. Lawton nodded, moved the carabiner without touching the boy's hands, fed the cord into the bollard's iron mouth, set the brake on the spool 2 clicks tighter. The line accepted the new geometry without outrage, and Ezra's body made the micro-adjustments you make when the thing you've been holding decides to help. The wind came down the rails as if it had paid for the right to ride. The platform boards vibrated with a human scale, no freight roar, no rattling cheapness, just the sensation of a heavy thing doing exactly the speed a heavy thing should. The The deputy at the east end put his hand out over the track, and his palm fizzed the way you get on playground slides when you were a child and forgot to slow down. 2:30, Ezra said. Rail Mary said, "Hush," which meant listen, not be quiet. Everyone obeyed her like a beloved aunt. Avery's line shifted tone. A faint, steady hum became a softer one. Friction altered. The payout slowed a degree. The geophones near the bench scratched different ink on Avery's graph. The signalman in the bungalow, who hadn't wanted to look in because he was that kind of superstitious that still knows which voltages matter, peered and then turned his head sideways because sometimes changing your angle makes physics kinder. 2:50, Ezra said. Marta glanced at the spool, one wrap left at visual, plus 3 the boy had tucked under, because he thinks ahead. You haven't got forever, she said, gently as buttering toast. Neither does she, he said, and in that instant I forgave the world for making teenagers insufferable. Sometimes they are simply exact. 300, he said, and blinked hard. The station clock ticked 3:15. It was no one's idea of midnight. It was this town's idea of a train. The spool stuttered once. The line lifted, not a snap, a rise, the way fishing line comes off the water when a fish changes its mind. Ezra's hands dropped half an inch with a sudden lack of weight. The brake squealed. The carabiner rung against iron. Sheriff Lawton swore once, short and rural, and palmed the brake before it had the idea to freewheel. The line went slack, not curtain slack, breathing slack, then drew tight again, not in the axis of the rails, but up and a hair to the west, like gravity was nostalgic. Loop it, Marta said, and Lawton grinned without humor. She had just given him permission to do something hands understood. He made 2 clove hitches the way men who rescue drunks at fairs do, and let the bollard have the strain. The boy didn't let go. He would not let go. The platform accepted his devotion and kept itself from humiliating him by staying still. Asher, who had been silent because he had pledged that to himself years ago, said, very softly, "She's at the window." "Whose?" Marta asked, no appetite for augury. "West," Asher said. He meant ours. He meant hers. He meant the seat she chose. Rail Mary had started crying without commentary. She wiped her eyes on the hem of her cardigan and kept counting in her chest. Numbers change nothing. They rescue the part of you that can still add. 3:20, Ezra whispered. 3:21. From the direction of the trestle there came, not light, not sound, pressure, the air equivalent of a hand on your sternum measuring your breath. People leaned back without deciding to. The station clock's second hand paused, not theatrically, not with a click, just a dignified hesitation like a person remembering the end of a joke before telling it. Then it moved on. You can put the candles away, Marta told Rail Mary, not because she had won, not because anyone had. We're doing this without props. Mary nodded, put the tote behind her heels, found Ezra with her eyes. You're doing fine, kid. 3:50, he said, and in the same breath. She's thinking. How do you know? Asher asked, because he likes data even when it comes in the wrong shape. It pulled, Ezra said. Then it didn't. Like when my sister almost says something that gets her grounded, and then says something else. Marta put one hand over her mouth for a second because laughter is rude in some miracles, then moved it to the brake because practicality is always polite. The line went slack again, more of it, the particular slack of a person taking a step toward you in a hallway and then stopping because they remembered why they shouldn't. People leaned forward without hip flexors consenting. The platform learned to forgive poor choreography. Somewhere, a man's knee cracked and everybody pretended they hadn't heard. 380, Ezra said. 381. The spool had a quarter wrap left. Lawton put his hand on the circumference, found the right pressure, became a governor for 10 seconds in a county that hadn't asked for one in years. Rail Mary, of all people, began to hum a tune that had nothing to do with trains and everything to do with dishes and kitchens and the kind of work you do when you hope the person you're doing it for comes home. A shift came through the line like weather changing 3 counties over. No fairness to it, no malice, the kind of shrug the world makes when you aren't the only one asking it for something. Ezra made a noise I had not heard him make all night, a small, animal syllable that belonged to children 3 summers ago, when he still believed adults meant it.
400, he said.
4. His hands lightened. The line stopped pulling. He gasped, not in pain, in surprise at the absence of a chore. Brake, Marta breathed. Lawton leaned the brake on, and it obeyed like metal that's been complimented. The line sagged into a long, irresponsible smile. For one half-breath, the platform thought it was done doing this sad work. It wasn't. A sound arrived that rails don't make. A click like a billiard ball, a tick like good scissors, a talk like a mantel clock that remembers its grandparents. The line jerked once, not toward the trestle, not toward the station, not up, not down.
On.
The spool leapt, the brake squealed. Ezra made a sound like a fisherman who knows what's on the hook isn't a fish. Lawton swore. Marta said a word she didn't in front of teenagers. Asher dropped the punch, and it made a neat star in the dust on the floor. Then the pressure went to nothing. Not slack. Nothing. The cord skittered, stopped, quivered like a plucked thing, and lay across Ezra's hands as if it had always been there only to make a line between one set of palms and another. 400 and 402, Ezra said, voice collapsing into itself. 402. That's not the number we expected, Asher said, because he dangerous loves arithmetics that admit being surprised. It's the number we got, Marta said, because she knows how many eggs so the diner doesn't run out. Rail Mary crossed herself again, and then did the thing I never thought I'd see her do. She sat down on a bench and let her train flowers tilt without straightening them. It takes the ones that want to go, she said, and meant sometimes and meant not tonight. The station lights flickered. Once, obedient. The relay in the bungalow stepped down from whatever god it had been and went back to being a switch. The crows rearranged themselves on the trestle like an unimportant parliament. The clock remembered to be vulgar again and ticked in a way you could buy at a big box store. Ezra opened his hands. The neon line lay there, looped and faintly buzzing with the ghost of a pull. He looked at Marta with an expression that made her reorder 1,000 days in her head and put this one near the top because it had taught her something about the economy of hope. Is she? Ezra began. She's thinking, Marta said, and she's got a seat. Rail Mary got up, shamed by her own getting up. I'll go light one candle, she said. For indecision. White. Asher bent, picked up the conductor's punch, dusted it like a relic, and put it back where shame and pride had set it earlier. I was no use, he said to nobody, which is the only safe person to say that to in public. You kept the clock honest, Marta said. That's a kind of food. Sheriff Lawton unclipped the line. He put it into Ezra's hands with the gentleness of returning a baby from a hospital to a mother in a parking lot, which is to say with care and wrongness in it, and clapped him once on the shoulder, a man's awkwardness dignified. You did good, he said. Now go home, because your parents are going to love me less if you're here when they notice. The boy shook his head once. I'll wait, he said. My sister will too. She'll say I'm stupid. She'll sit anyway. Smart girl, Marta said. The platform exhaled its gathered breath, the universal human noise you get when a verdict is delivered and the sentence is live with it. Asher flipped the ticket sign to closed and then flipped it back again, conflicted men's compromise. Rail Mary lit a candle anyway and put it under the bench where no one would call it a fire hazard. Down the line, beyond the trestle, in woods that had not carried rails since the timber yard moved and the state went cheap, a light nobody had installed passed between trunks with the demure confidence of dinner guests who know the way. The night accepted it, then took it back. On board, in Coach B, in a corridor that had decided windows were a luxury, I held my breath and did not hold the world to promises it hadn't made me. Lena's hand found the seat back and stopped asking it to keep her. The conductor stood with his manifest and waited while the car finished instructing us what verbs it had made available. The recorder turned. The line at my hip, beloved, foolish, loosened with the precise fraction that told me a boy had been told to go home and refused. Decide, the train asked, without malice, as if we were in a room with good chairs and water, and I thought about mercy, and I thought about spectacle, and I thought about all the nouns I had been paid to keep other people from misusing. I will, I said to Lena, to the conductor, to the long steel sentence that kept using the word on when I wanted the word off. 9 minutes is a long time. It was almost over. The part without windows would end. What came after would not be kinder, only clearer. On, said the conductor over my shoulder, and for the first time I heard the part he didn't say, not forever. Chapter 5. The Car Without an Outside. The change didn't come with thunder or theatrics. It arrived like an instruction, quiet, categorical, uninterested in whether we approved. One heartbeat we looked through glass at pines sliding by in their late summer green. The next we were looking at our own faces, the aisle lamps, the polished metal of luggage racks, the conductor's cap badge, a world sealed in its reflection as neatly as a specimen on a slide.
No blackout.
No sudden cold. Just mirror. Lena touched the window first, splaying her fingers as if she could pry the world back into two pieces. Her palm left a fogged print. It vanished as fast as breath on a spoon. I hate this more than the dark, she said, voice level because she'd spent years teaching and not to tremble. It's honest, I said. We're the thing to look at. That's what I hate, she said, but the corners of her mouth softened. Argument gave her something to stand on. The coach breathed. We all heard it. The low chassis hum, the faint percussion of air over seams, the polite chatter of crockery in the galley 2 cars up. Under it, a pulse railroads retired decades ago. Jointed track, the old 3-beat men used to carry home in their bones. Click, click, talk. Impossible, because every mile north of Hallowfield had been relayed or torn up. In here, impossible had a schedule. The conductor came half the length of the aisle, not to make a speech, just to be a witness. Up close his face had the practical kindness of people who keep timetables for a living. This portion of the run has no outside, he said in a tone that belonged to instructions about luggage and feet. It doesn't last long. It always feels longer than it is. How long? Lena asked without looking away from herself. 9 minutes, I answered. Everything in this town is 9 minutes long when it wants to make a point. He inclined his head, thrice 9 by the log. Once for each time someone wrote to a person they loved and pretended it was for themselves. I pulled the pocket recorder up to my ear, not to speak, to listen. Cheap motors sing when they're sure of their job. Beneath the carriage noise, something lay on the tape I couldn't hear in the room. Names murmured like stations announced to sleepers. Mercy. Wayside. And then the hush hundreds of bodies make the moment before they stand. You hear anything? Lena asked. Us mostly, I said, with a layer we didn't bring. She let her hand fall, then propped her forearm on the sill and used her own reflection as an adversary. I thought I'd be brave, she said. I keep waiting for brave to show up like a train. It doesn't. That's all right, I told her. Every courtroom I've ever sat in was full of people who only had steady. The conductor stopped by our row. When the windows come back, he said, there'll be a halt. A wayside. No staff.
No bench.
It's enough platform for a decision and not a ceremony. What's it called? I asked for the tape for myself. Mile 402, he said, though names are for people who stay. Why the mirrors? Lena asked. Why make us look at ourselves when we already do that badly? Because turning off the lights is a trick, he said. This isn't a trick. Down the car, someone whispered, I'm sorry, to a seat back and made the seat noble for the effort. A woman slid her wedding ring around her finger and returned it to its place with the embarrassment of a person caught putting on armor backward. A man in an old suit, creased just so, careful in the way carefulness can become a prison, stared at the aisle light the way you stare at a lighthouse when you've already decided. The cars hummed cooled a degree, then warmed. My ears popped as if we'd passed under weather. Time did its usual trick where 1 minute stretched far enough to cover a life and then snapped back. I watched the second hand on my watch argue briefly with the minute, then fall into line like a dog called off a scent. The jointed rhythm, click, click, talk, kept time so gently I caught myself breathing to it. Does anybody ever change your book after they've boarded? I asked the conductor, nodding at the manifest under his arm. They change their minds, he said. The book honors that with a better hand. No delete key? I said. Just crossings outdone with respect, he answered. Lena angled toward me. If I step off at your little no bench, no ceremony platform, and then get back on, can the world cope with that? The world reschedules everything eventually, I said. It'll survive you needing a minute. It's always a minute, she muttered. And then, because we had earned a little levity, you're sure we aren't going to tunnel into an allegory? If we do, I'm filing a federal complaint, I said. The mirror thinned. It didn't change so much as forget, as if remembering it was supposed to be a window was easier than maintaining the lie. Color bled back in, pine, ditch water, the sodium orange of a distant yard light. 20 feet from the sill, a strip of timber carried a plank platform no higher than my shin. A weathered board bore block letters, mile 402, fresh paint on old wood. Beyond it, a path pressed into cinders like a habit. Doors, the conductor said softly, and the vestibule answered with a breath. The traps folded, the seals sighed. Fresh night, clean and local, entered at ankle height the way truth often does, unfancy, patient, smelling of sap. He didn't say now or never. He didn't say anything about God. He stood aside. People rose the way people do when they catch themselves about to choose. The man in the old suit stood like someone lifting his own verdict. The woman who had tested her ring put both hands on the jamb as if offering a pact to brass. Two rose up. A college kid in a cheap jacket stepped onto the timber with the tenderness of learning his legs belonged to him. Decision in 60, the conductor said. That's an extravagant amount of time. You can do it in 10 if you must. I stood. So did Lena. Which way? I asked. Not backwards, she said. I don't think that's offered. We went down together. The plank flexed beneath our weight. A good, honest complaint. The cinders bit my soles through leather. The neon kite line on my hip slackened with a small theatrical flourish. Then it found the angle to the boy's hands at the station and settled into a quiet, live tug, present, like a pulse under your thumb. I gave it 2 little answering pulls. The line replied with a soft hum. I felt more than heard. What happens if I step into the path and I'm still the person I was? Lena asked at her driest. Then you're more honest about it, I said. She looked past me, past the sign, into a stand of scrub oak that would, not tonight, not to me, smell like her mother's cigarettes. She took something from her jacket pocket, a photograph, I think. She let her see it and slid it back. Okay, she said, and surprised even herself with the tone. Okay. 30, the conductor called, not hurrying us, guarding the minute. I'll walk down and back, I told Lena, just far enough to prove the ground is ground and not theater. If you get back on, it won't be because I asked you to. And if I don't, it won't be because the train is noble, she said. We had reached the generosity that lets 2 people stop flattering a machine. I stepped off the timber into the cinders, then onto the path beaten through them by feet that had done this before me. Up, down, back, off. The night wrapped my shins in weeds and my knees in warm air. The horizon made no effort to glow. Somewhere a nightjar sawed the dark. The sign said 402 with the confidence of a number that had been believed. Behind me the doors breathed once. Time, the conductor said, regretless, responsible, and the train resumed.
No lurch. No cruelty.
It simply withdrew, as if the world were on a spool, and it was giving back line. The tail lamp slid off the timber's edge, and went away down a right-of-way I would never map. The jointed beat returned to weld-smooth hiss. Then the night was only our county again. Lena hadn't moved.
Or she had.
That part isn't mine to diarize. She existed in the minute that belongs to people who've earned belief in their own verbs. The door shut. The coach sighed. The mirror phase was behind them and would be again. And I was in the weeds with grit in my shoes, the line on my hip humming like a very patient heart. On, I told the invisible machine because I wanted it to hear the word in my voice and know it didn't own it. It didn't answer. Good machines don't. I turned toward home. Chapter 6. The Road with No Ceremony. The path from 402 had the civility of work boots. It wasn't a trailheads and hashtags path. It was a way men in orange vests take to get a job done, and women who don't have time for ghosts adopt because it gets them where the grocery store is. Blackberry canes batted my calves. Burrs delegated themselves to my socks. The neon line brushed weeds and came away singing like kite string at a lake. The air had crickets stitched into it, and the faint iron smell that lingers in places where metal has once believed in itself. I kept my hands free and my head up and counted intersections because counting keeps panic from buying real estate. At 7 minutes, the scrub gave to grade. At 9, the ballast underfoot grain shifted to crushed limestone. At 12, I stepped around a stack of old ties in the county maintenance lot and came into the back of town like a server through a kitchen. The trestle waited exactly where it had been all afternoon. Would truss dark with creosote, steel plates showing the silver of work, water under it muttering commonplace water things. I laid my palm on a support and felt the warmth the day keeps well past midnight. On one side of me, rails with 5 years of municipal pride laid across them. On the other, cinders and ghosts. Between, a seam that would not photograph. I took a Polaroid anyway because I cannot help myself. The frame tried to find poetry and settled for texture. Granite, oak, a ridiculous span of neon line drawing itself across the edge where map and story politely refused to agree.
Good.
I prefer texture. Hallowfield's platform glowed 2 blocks on. Griddle and Shine slept with 1 neon letter missing. Yeah, and I thought, because gallows humor keeps you breathing, fair enough. The station clock had decoupled itself from duty again and gone back to being hands under glass. On the platform, a knot of people had compacted around a boy whose wrists would be sore in the morning. A woman with a diner apron had her hand on his shoulder. A sheriff stood with the bolt cutters of a man who likes props he hopes he won't need. Rail Mary's tote bag held flowers shaped like trains. I didn't run. I arrived. Marta saw me first. She didn't cry out. She isn't that kind of person. She leaned into Ezra's line of sight and gave a mother's half nod you can see without feeling managed.
He turned.
When he saw the neon curve slap happy across my hip, he let out one of those exhalations the human equipment only issues a handful of times in a lifetime, a noise that makes a new dent in your ribs from the inside. I gave the cord 2 small tugs, present, present, and he answered, then reeled in with the concentrated grace of a boy unlearning adrenaline.
402, he said.
It came out as a report, not a brag. Paint was still tacky, I said, and that earned me Marta's fast, injured laugh. Sheriff Lawton kept a hand on the spool, as if we'd trained him. When the last rap settled, he thumbed off the brake and coiled the end on the bollard like a man patting away a hose after a fire that didn't get a name. He didn't say good job. He doesn't waste compliment on chores. He said, "You hungry?" And that was better. Asher stood in the booth, with the old punch on the marble like an altarpiece. He didn't ask if I'd seen the locomotive number or the builder's plate. He asked the only question a station master with a soul has any business asking. Did you step back down under your own power?
I did, I said. There was a sign, a path.
A minute that takes its work seriously. Lena? Marta asked, not bothering with me until we'd spoken the name that owned the night. I saw her on the timber when the door shut, I said. What she did with the minute after that is her business, and she's earned it. Rail Mary put a white candle under the bench and didn't light it. She had decided tonight didn't need flame anymore. I always tell people it takes the ones who are ready, she said. I forget that sometimes being almost ready is the bravest thing we do. Ezra flexed his fingers. The skin at the base of his thumbs had chafed into 2 small glossy arcs like new moons. His hoodie cuffs had 2 bright channels melted into the nap where the line had sung. He looked like he might apologize for not being more heroic. Marta ruined that intention with a paper cup of water and the practiced glare of a woman who has kept teenagers alive with carbs and correctly directed shame. Recorder, Asher said, too quickly, catching himself, then adding, only if you feel like.
I did.
I slid to a knee at the platform edge, reached under the lip where I'd taped the cheap deck against the yellow line. A smear of grease on my knuckles felt like an honest metal. The cassette came away gummy and warm. I set it on the marble label out. From my jacket, I took the onboard tape, the one I'd tucked under the vestibule step like a thief with too much hope. I wrote on both with a pen that doesn't lie, platform/W lip and coach B/best step.
Times. Date.
The little star I draw when I expect to weep later and would like to remember why. What did it sound like? Ezra asked. Not what was it, not where did it go. The boy had learned the category that keeps you sane sound. Like every other train, I said. Only more courteous to clocks. We went inside because night air makes people dramatic and tile floors don't. Marta pushed a carafe across the ticket counter, then mugs. Lawton wrote a report full of nouns that would survive the morning and verbs that wouldn't. Asher drew a line in the log, block dark, 9 minutes. Then, in a margin, a smaller line beneath it that looked suspiciously like relief. I couldn't help myself. I pressed the platform tape to my ear and listened with my thumbnail half over the playback hole like a girl sneaking radio under blankets. There it all was. The line rising into the bollard, the small scream of the brake, the sheriff's bitten off swear, Asher's ragged. She's at the window, Rail Mary's breath catching, and then evening itself with Matt. And under it all, that polite jointed pulse from nowhere near Hallowfield's modern rail. Click, click, talk. The sound of a century preferring to speak in triplets. The vestibule tape, later, would give me more than I was ready for. The conductor's unobtrusive tickets, please, the names in a cadence that turned strangers into passengers, a single cup clink in the galley, my voice pretending to be objective and getting most of the way there, and then, during the mirror phase, almost nothing but carriage hum and a whisper that might have been station names drifting through decades.
Mercy.
Wayside. 402. If I never publish that part, it won't be because I'm afraid of mockery. It will be because there are a few sounds you owe to people who stood in them. We were still divvying out the last of the water when a text came to my phone from an unknown number. Be coach. West window. Thank you for not telling me what to do. There was no read receipt, no ping back, no fancy signature. I couldn't tell whether she had stepped on or off. I didn't need to. The minute had belonged to her. The rest of the night could belong to the town. Eat, Marta said, maternal and tyrannical. Then we'll argue about whether the state owes us fencing on the north side of the trestle, like we're regular people with regular problems. As God intended, Rail Mary said, already rooting in her tote for muffins that had survived being mistaken for flowers. Asher pushed the old conductor's punch across the marble toward me, as if I might know what to do with it. We found this after the 85 departure, he said. It isn't ours. Nothing else in the room is missing when it shows up. I lock it up, and then on these years, I set it out like superstition. For luck or honesty. I can't tell the difference.
The mark matches, I said. It always does, he said.
We stood there with plastic cups, and a tape I didn't deserve to have, and a line cooling back into neon on the counter, and names that might get carved into a brass plaque if anyone felt equal to the task. Outside, Hallowfield went on like respectable towns do. Compressors and porch lights, and the petulant last flight of crows who don't respect curfew. The station clock would be wrong again by dawn, and right again the next time the train wanted witnesses. Behind my ribs, I felt the small tug of a thing that might have been grief, and might have been duty, and might have been the remnant of a line stretched to a wayside and back. It was gentle. It did not own me. Tomorrow, Sheriff Lawton said, putting the bolt cutters away, we pretend. Tonight, Marta said, topping off cups. We keep each other awake until the ordinary remembers how to do its job. I pocketed both cassettes and left a note for myself in the logbook. Quinn took tapes. Return after dub, because my worst sin is always disorganization disguised as romance. Ezra leaned his head on his forearms, spent without the performance of it. Rail Mary hummed something older than trains. Asher straightened the pens in their cup. The station breathed. 9 minutes had passed as promised. The rest of the work, the listening, the writing, the paying of ordinary debts, would take longer. That's all right. The car had given us back our outside. Now came the part with chairs. Chapter 7, Playback. By the time the sky lightened to the color of a bruise admitting defeat, the station smelled like coffee and old tape. Marta had committed a pot to the Enterprise and was rationing it as if we were on ship stores. Asher produced a battered dual cassette deck from a cabinet where he keeps things he doesn't want the town council to know he uses, and Sheriff Lawton contributed a surge protector, like a man offering a sword. Label first, I said, because chaos is patient. I wrote on the shells, Coach B/Vest Step/001, Platform/WLIP/001.
Date. Time.
The little star I draw when I expect hard listening. Ezra bent close, elbows on the marble, eyes wider than midnight had any right to make them.
Fast up.
Asher asked, finger hovering near the DUB button. No, I said. We'll take it at human speed. We threaded platform first, the little cogs grabbing the leader and pulling it into the dark. The cheap speakers gave us hiss, then the sound of our own town listening to itself. The line easing over the bollard, a brake squeal, Lawton's single-syllable farmyard profanity swallowed before it offended the clock, Rail Mary's breath catching, and then disciplining itself into numbers. Under it, and it did not belong to this place, the triplet no modern rail has any right to make click, click, talk. Jointed track, stick rail, a century that refuses to keep quiet. Not our line. The grain co-op's engineer said from the doorway, called in by the text messages that travel without ceremony in towns like ours. Every stick north of the trestle was pulled out in 12. We're continuous from here to the state line. Asher nodded at the log. The bungalow blacked out 9 minutes, he said, then came back like it had never left. Every time, the engineer murmured, fascinated and offended. On the tape, the 9 minutes ran like a single held breath. Then, as if a room full of people shrugged with the same muscle, a release. Cups moving with clicking, someone Asher whispering she's at the window, with the kind of soft that bruises the throat. I pressed stop.
No ceremony.
I turned the cassette over, rewound it to the middle of the silent 9, and thumbed play with the volume low, my nail half covering the speaker port the way I did on radios under blankets as a kid. The hush had a texture, layers. Almost language, undercarriage noise. The kind you hear when a microphone picks up what a room won't admit. What is it? Ezra breathed. Station names. I said, not trusting myself yet. Whispered like a conductor, trying not to wake a sleeper. I let it spool. Mercy, Napier, Harrow Bend, Wayside. For a chord after. The sound air makes when a lot of people stand at once in a church basement. Don't you dare tell me this is a radio artifact, Rail Mary said, more prayer than challenge. It's older than our radios, I said. The mic took it because it was there.
Coach tape next.
Doors, the two-note chime from a world that believed in politeness. The conductor's plane, tickets, please. Names, Raymond Evers, Joan Mallory. Punched with a star that matched the puncture scars in Asher's marble where he'd tested the relic. My voice pretending to be objective and getting most of the way there. Then the mirror, hiss and hum, and the jointed 3-beat, and under it those same names as if the car remembered the route to its marrow. Lena's voice wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. The train didn't record decisions. It recorded opportunities. We sat with our cups and the cheap Dex fans clicking to a stop. Lawton wrote no incident/witnesses concur in a notebook with the sarcasm of a man keeping the world legal by lying carefully. Asher lifted the old conductor's punch from the marble and turned it in his hand until the light caught the tooth just right. A 5-point star, 1 point just a hair blunted, the kind of imperfection that makes a thing a signature. That mark, I said, nodding, matches a stub from 1905. You've seen it? Rail Mary asked, already rummaging in her tote.
Not yet, I said.
But I know a room where it will be. The county historical. Marta topped off cups. Eat something first, she said. Then go tell the librarians you saw a miracle. They'll file it under Transportation Regional. The Hallowfield Historical Room is wedged between genealogy and a case of rifles the library board won't let the town sell. Mrs. Cray, who runs it, has hair like stationery and a handling collection of objects that shouldn't be handled and are. She gave me the professional's once-over and waved me to the railroad shelf with a tired kindness that made me promise to bring her a blueberry pie. I found it in a binder labeled M&O Memorabilia, donated, a mounted ticket stub with a star punch, date October 17th, 1905, Napier to Harrow Bend, and a pencil note in an old clerk's hand, Conductor J, Thorn, last run. Next to it, a gray photograph of a man in a cap leaning out of vestibule, eyes like a person who has been practicing goodbye for longer than any company should ask. The caption, Jasper Thorn, conductor, Midland and Ohio, died in service at Harrow Bend during washout. Saved 6. The punch hung on a chain around his wrist in the picture. The tooth looked like Asher's, down to the blunted point. Mrs. Cray, I called, and she materialized with the smell of card catalogs and old glue. Do you have more on Thorn? She produced a file labeled Harrow Bend Washout with that slight librarian's frown that means I'm not thrilled to be right about knowing where the sorrow is. Newspaper clippings with words the century should have retired, heroic, widower, and a paragraph that made my scalp prickle. Remains not recovered. Company vows memorial. On the back, a pasted note in a later hand. Rumors of a Thorn special scheduled to evacuate Napier families never substantiated. And in the margins, 30 years later, a shaky pencil. Train still runs. Mrs. Cray tapped that with a fingernail. That note's from the woman who kept this room before me, she said. She was sane. Back at the station, Asher laid the historical photo beside the punch, like a man comparing a saint's bone to a bone. The tooth matched. The blunted point matched. The chain matched. I watched his face do a quiet math. I found this after the 85 departure, he said, fingers very careful on the steel. Bottom drawer of the ticket window. No one had opened that drawer in a decade. It wasn't ours before. It is ours now, whether I like it or not. He keeps the book too, Rail Mary said. Thorn. She meant the manifest. She meant the names read like prayers. Does he bring anyone back? Ezra asked, practical, breaking the spell the way boys should. No, I said, but he stops twice, once in the glass, and once at a wayside. That's not mercy. It's a minute. Lawton tapped the log with his pencil. So we have a name for the uniform, he said. A wreck for the myth. A punch with a pedigree. A sound older than our equipment knows how to fake. What we don't have is a crime. You're thinking like a sheriff, I said. Keep doing that. He tilted his hat back. And you. I'm going to find Harrow Bend, I said, and see whether a river that pulled a man out of a car can keep a timetable. Marta slid a wrapped sandwich into my hand, as if she'd read my plan. You'll need a map, she said, and pie for Mrs. Cray. Working on both, I said, and put the punch's photograph and the copies Mrs. Cray had grudgingly let me make into a folder with an elastic band, as if paper could keep a century from wandering. The river was 8 miles north by road and a half-mile west by trespass. We took Lawton's county truck because he owns 3 kinds of permission, and Ezra because he would have followed on a BMX otherwise, and Rail Mary because she is more useful than people who believe in trains generally are. The sky had gone honest blue. The water under the old washed-out span moved with the arrogance of nothing remembering who it drowned. There were no rails. There were scoured banks and a half-buried milepost with the numbers sanded off by flood. There was a cut stone abutment with initials carved in, JT/1904, and the ring of an old telegraph pole at an angle like a drunk. There were cinders under the scrub if you dug with your heel. If you listened, and we did long enough to be misled, you could hear the triplet click-click talk soft as if made in another room. Rail Mary hung her rosary from the old pole and didn't look at me. I light my candles here, she said, when I'm being foolish, which is often. Ezra squinted upstream. What's that? A shape half hidden where silt had settled like a sampler. Tin, glass, all the sizes of regret. We scrambled. Lawton swore about liability and then used his bolt cutters like tongs to pull it free. A leather satchel, swelled and petrified. He levered the buckle with a penknife and it gave. Inside, paper ruined. A waterlogged book whose linen pages tore, if you looked hard. And at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth that had done its best, a small bound manifest. Linen, like the one the conductor carried, fused around its edges, but legible in its middle. M&O, Special, Thorn, Conductor. Date, October 18th, 1905. Station names in a hand you could have set your life by. Napier, Mercy, Harrow Bend, Wayside 402. Space left after. Not blank, left. The first 3 names had faint pencil ticks beside them. The last 2 did not. On. Rail Mary whispered. Not at me. On. I wrapped the little book back in the oilcloth because some things you don't ask the sun to finish destroying, and because museums make their own magic if you bring them offerings. The river muttered. The wind found us and left. We stood on a bank where a man had earned a legend and a job and lost one to the other, and useful people asked useful questions. What are you going to do with that? Lawton asked. Let people see it, I said, and make them sit down before they do. And Lena? Marta asked when we were back on the road with cinders in our shoes and the satchel in a towel on the truck's floor. She texted, I said. It still felt like a loan when I said it. From B. Coach, West Window. Thanked me for not telling her what to do. Marta nodded once, solemn, like a woman receiving a sacrament she hadn't ordered and somehow deserved. Good, she said. We'll make up a blue plate for when she doesn't come back for lunch. Hope isn't a schedule, Rail Mary muttered, but she didn't say it unkindly. We drove back to Hallowfield with the river on my skin and the jointed phantom beat in my teeth, that triplet that insists certain rooms keep their own time. At the station, we laid the little book next to the punch and the photograph of Jasper Thorne, and Asher did something I had not expected. He took off his cap. Not out of superstition. Out of respect for a man who kept his verb. Tonight, he said, I'm going to unlock the glass case and make the town sit in chairs while we talk about what happens every 20 years. Chairs, Marta said. Water. Windows, Ezra added, and everyone looked at him as if he had told us our own rules. Lights, Rail Mary finished, because she loves a liturgy. We had tapes. We had a name. We had a book that had gone into a river and chosen to be rescued. We did not have a solution, because solutions are for puzzles. We had a machine that asked for witnesses, and sometimes, if you were very lucky and mean honest, stopped where you could step down and become the kind of person who counts. Chapter 8. Harrow, Ben's Ledger. The town hall has bad acoustics and chairs that punish. We used the station instead. Marta covered the ticket counter with butcher paper and wrote reading at the top in a hand big enough for the crows to see from the trestle. Asher unlocked the museum case that holds the railroad artifacts and carried the Jasper Thorne photo, the punch, and the rescued manifest out like a parishioner who has been deputized into altar duty. Rail Mary set a coil of candles within reach and promised not to light them unless told. She lies, but only when Mercy and Fire agree. People came. You can get Hallowfield to a meeting in 20 minutes if you say the word train and don't offer punch. The mayor sat with his notebook like a student and did not try to lead. Mrs. Cray took the front row, eyes on the punch like she might snatch it back if we disrespected it. The grain engineer brought a rolled map of the old right-of-way and 2 laser pointers he'd stolen from his own children. Asher opened the little book to the page that had survived the river. He didn't try to hold it up. He put it flat on the butcher paper and beckoned people closer, like a man calling them to see a child sleep. Even from 3 feet, you could read Thorne's hand, training and duty and a personality that had chosen neatness as defense. Napier, Mercy, Harrow Bend, Wayside. For 02, ticks by the first 3, the last 2 waiting. Tickets, please, I said quietly, because sometimes you have to name the ritual to let it sit in the room without making a spectacle of it. We played the tapes, not all, not loud. Just the pieces a town can stand to hear about itself. The platform's 9-minute hush, the breath when the line went slack at 402, the respectful triplet, that ancient click, click talk under our modern hum. On the coach tape, the conductor's unremarkable tickets please, the names on a Friday night manifest from a century and a ghost away. We did not play the mirror. There are silences you keep even from people you trust. Then the questions, because even miracles must respect civic process. Could it be staged? The mayor asked to get it out of the way. Somebody with speakers. A projection. The engineer shook his head before I had to. The bungalow dropped a block and came back. You don't fake that from outside. Not with our junk. The mic picked up jointed rail. The nearest stick is a county and a half away. Why 402? Mrs. Cray asked, Pen hovering over a card the way she does when she's about to label something forever. Because 9 minutes is how long it takes to forgive yourself one thing, Rail Mary said, and nobody laughed. Because the old Napier District mileage put the Harrow Bend washout right at 401.7, the engineer said, pointing at his map. And men like round numbers when they cut new boards. Because Thorne wrote it that way, Asher said, practical and brutal. He put it in his book, and the book is what the machine remembers. I set the photograph down next to the punch and the little book and let the three of them make a sentence. A man, his tool, his ledger. We don't know what this is, I said. We know how it behaves. It arrives whether we dignify it or not. It doesn't take those who don't give it a ticket. It offers a mirror and a wayside. It reads names that are already on a page, and it will, if you ask it to, let a woman stand on a plank for 1 rich minute and step whichever way belongs to her. What about the ones who go? Someone in the back asked. Do they write? Do they? She stopped. She had asked a question she was brave enough to ask and not cruel enough to finish. Mrs. Cray cleared her throat. There are letters, she said, surprising herself. The room keeps them.
Not all the time.
Not for everyone. We don't display them, she added quickly, looking at me like a teacher daring me to be crass. They come in a pouch on the counter the morning after. They aren't stamped. They smell like lemon oil and dust. They're dressed.
Some are one line.
Some are entire days. She opened a drawer I had assumed held thumbtacks and produced a bundle tied with cotton tape. She looked to Asher, and he gave her a single slow nod. She set them down and untied the tape and laid the top letter open like a wound that doesn't fester.
M.
I am not brave. I am simply finished. Take the plants. Give the cat to whoever stoops first. Walk to the trestle when you hate me. It is a good place for being mad.
J. 1985.
Another, on paper that had wanted to be folded and put in a pocket.
Dad.
You were right about the work being the thing. I'm sorry I did not believe you while you had the breath to say it. Tell Mrs. Phelps I owe 3 pies. R.E. 2005. A third, recent enough for the ink to still shine a little in its low parts. Avery, thank you for not making me incidental to your courage. If I come back, it won't be through a door you opened.
L. 2025.
Ezra made a sound like a man learning to swallow properly for the first time. Marta put a hand flat on the paper next to Lena's line and didn't touch it, as if heat could hurt it. We don't display them, Mrs. Cray repeated. We keep them. Families can read theirs. They don't get to take them. We're not a post office. We're a room that knows how to hold paper. Lawton folded his arms. So next time, he said evenly, we'll have chairs. We'll have water. We'll have a list of counselors who don't make decisions for people. We'll have an officer at either end of the platform to collect props from men who think their grief deserves an audience. And muffins, Marta said. I don't hear muffins on your list. Muffins, he conceded. The engineer tapped the map, where the washed-out section made a ragged bite. Harrow Bend is unstable. Nobody goes down there without telling me first. Not because ghosts. Because that bank will eat a leg if you stand in the wrong mood. I'll put a note on the board, Asher said, already reaching for a thumbtack. We took questions until the chairs learned to complain. Who chooses? We don't know. Why 20 years? Because that is how long shame takes to start calling itself nostalgia. Does the conductor have a first name? Jasper. Will he be angry if we say it? He has more interesting work than our courtesy. Does the train ever arrive? I didn't answer that one. The engineer did, and his voice was gentler than his profession. It arrives exactly where it means to, he said. We're just not on that platform. After People drifted in the way they do after funerals and good council meetings, half afraid to go home because home means admitting you are among the living. I took the little book to the back office with Mrs. Cray, and we laid it open under a desk lamp, and I photographed each page with a steadiness I did not have last year and may never have again. We cataloged the punch's measurements like archivists. We wrote provenance, recovered riverbank below former Harrow Bend after flood year, likely personal property of conductor Jasper Thorne in a hand that had learned to be steady on other days. On my way out, Ezra met me at the door with his hoodie sleeves dark from the line. If I'd had more string, he said, and didn't finish, because he's quick. It would still have asked her, I said. It would always ask her. Next time, he said, and I let him. Night laid itself down properly over Hallowfield for the first time since the rails hummed. The station clock went back to lying with its usual cheerful audacity. The bungalow relays clicked when trucks crossed the county road instead of when a century crossed our town. Marta took a white envelope from behind the counter and slid it under the cash drawer, the place the letters appear in the morning after, and shut it with the same secular dignity she uses for pies. I walked to the trestle alone. The frogs had opinions and gave them freely. The water said what water says when it is almost too tired to be river. I stood with my hand on the timber and listened for the triplet and decided it was all right that I could not hear it tonight. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. B coach. West window. 402 is big enough to hold a decision. No name. No need. I put the phone away without answering. Some correspondence you file by breathing. When I got back to the station, Asher had locked the case again. The punch gleamed like honesty despite the glass. The little book lay on a velvet mount Mrs. Cray had magicked out of a drawer. A typed label waited, not yet pinned. M&O Conductor's Manifest, Special, 1905, J. Thorne. Beneath it, in smaller type on loan to those who promised to sit down first. Tomorrow, Marta said, flicking the lights one by one so the room wouldn't feel abandoned, will be ordinary on purpose. Good, I said. Ordinary is a virtue. Come by at lunch, she said. If the west window texts you again, bring pie. Chapter 9. The day after, the ledger open. Morning in Hallowfield wore yesterday like a coat still damp at the hems. Griddle and Shine had the griddle up and the bell off because bells were a cruelty after a night like that. Marta slid plates as if calories could reset clocks and made the coffee stronger than sense. Sheriff Lawton came in with the county truck keys looped on one finger and the look of a man who had spent the last 2 hours writing sentences he didn't want to be true in a report he had no business filing. Rail Mary took a booth and arranged her tote of train flowers into an altar she promised she wasn't going to use. Asher, who never eats in public when there's paperwork, brought the station ledger anyway and sat across from me with the conductor's punch wrapped in a bar towel like something you hand back to the sea. Ezra claimed the stool by the window, hoodie sleeves shining where the line had taught them a lesson, eyes with that new geometry you only get after the first time your hands held more than you knew they were capable of. You look less haunted than you have a right to, Marta told me, which is her love language.
Eggs.
Eggs. I admit it because she was right about both things. We have a problem dressed up as a blessing, Asher said softly once plates were down. He tapped the towel bundle, then the ledger. We told the town. We did it properly. People are going to bring people. We don't sell tickets, he added in a tone hard enough to dent in. We make a room, I said, and a rule. And we stick to both and offend everyone who arrives with a camera and a smile. Good, Lawton said, not looking up from the salt shaker he'd confiscated from himself. I'm very tired of smiles. Ezra toyed with a jam packet because teenage hands do not do well at idle. Do we keep the punch? He tried to make it a casual question. He did not succeed. We keep it until we know who we're keeping it from, I said, and who we might owe it to. I slid a manila folder across the table. Photocopies from the historical room. Jasper Thorne's photograph, the 1905 stub with a star tooth, the clipped article about the washout at Harrow Bend. The linen manifest we'd hauled from the river sat on top, wrapped in the towel alongside the punch so grease, and history wouldn't fight. Lawton leaned back. You're thinking road trip. I'm thinking map.
I said. Napier. Mercy.
Harrow bent. We should let those words put their weight back on our tires. We'll show the ledger to anyone who remembers they owe it something. Ezra brightened in that bare, boyish way that makes a town stupid enough to trust youth with a chore. Can I? You have school, Marta said reflexively, then caught herself because dawn after a train is no place for reflex. You can come if you don't tell your mother I said you have school, and if you let me give you a sandwich you will not eat until it is a new geological era.
Deal, he said gravely. Rail Mary didn't ask.
She pulled a rosary out of her tote like a pocket knife and let it dangle on one finger. Napier's Depot is a church now, she offered. They call it Mercy Fellowship because marketing and God have never agreed. The old station master's granddaughter runs a thrift rack. She'll know how to keep a room.
Good, I said.
We'll bring a chair. And water. We drove north with the punch and a towel on my lap, like contraband, and the river's jointed phantom pulse still somewhere in our teeth. The county flattened, then rolled, then presented Napier the way it presents every town it's failed. Rust on corrugated, a shuttered feed dealer, a lovely brick depot with a new cross and a banner that promised service 10 and 6 and meant both. The tracks through town still had ballast but no trains. The right-of-way was a shared-use trail whose name had been chosen by a committee that could not make a joke. Napier's Depot, Mercy Fellowship now, smelled like floor polish and after-service donuts. The thrift rack did a brisk trade in cardigans that took their job seriously. A woman with neat hair and a badge that said Lydia looked up from the donations ledger with the proprietorial kindness of someone who knows where the broom is and likes that about herself. We're looking for the old names, I said, and laid the photocopies out like a tarot no one had asked for. Jasper Thorne, Harrow Bend, a special that never made it. She touched the photograph with 2 fingers the way people do when they've learned to be gentle with paper. He's on our wall in the back hall, she said. We call it the Saints' Walk even though he wasn't a regular churchman. He brought my grandfather home from a mill trip once after a derailment and refused the cigar my grandfather offered. She smiled. He used to put his cap in his hands when he walked into the station master's office, even though no one asked him to. We found his manifest, Ezra blurted, then checked himself so he wouldn't take joy from a sentence that belonged in another category. Part of it. We're not here to make a show, I added. We're here to put chairs where they didn't used to be. She led us to the back hall. The Saints' Walk was poor church and good archive, photographs at eye level, captions typed on a machine that had outlived at least 3 pastors. Jasper Thorne's picture hung between a missionary who'd lasted 6 months and an organist who had lasted 50 years. Under Thorne, conductor. Kept time. Died at the river doing what he did every day. Someone had taped a ticket stub under the frame. The punch mark was a star, 1 point blunted. Lydia stood with her hands folded, as if waiting for a hymn to decide whether it was going to be sung. We still get visitors some years, she said. They ask to sit in the old ticket office, and we let them. They usually write something and leave it under the blotter. We find it when we wipe down. Sometimes they leave a stub. I don't know where they get them. We don't sell tickets. Once every generation, somebody walks in and asks for the west window. Her mouth did a small, brave thing. Sometimes they leave with it. Has a train ever? Lawton started, then stopped, because asking a church to sign off on a haunting is rude. No train, she said. A wind. The click of something older than our lights. A smell like lemon oil and dust, like someone cleaned up after themselves. Once a cup fell over in the old waiting room, all by itself, and no one apologized for months. We won't take the stub, I said, because her eyes were on it. We made a copy already, she said. We keep the copy, you take the real thing where it needs to go. Back at the counter, she slid a shallow drawer open and took out a small leather pouch with M&O stamped on it in letters losing their certainty. Inside were 3 things. A car key that did not belong to any make left on the road, a pocket watch with a cracked crystal stopped at 12:09, and an old brass bell tongue without its bell. People leave things, Lydia said, a little apologetically. We keep them because throwing them out feels like we'd have to answer for it someday. 12:09, Ezra murmured. peering at the watch. Harrow Bend washed out at 12:09 past the hour, Rail Mary said. The old paper said so. They liked the drama. We thanked Lydia with 220 slid under the ledger and a promise to send a copy of the 1905 article for the Saints' Walk. She pressed a wrapped cookie into Ezra's hand with that infallible churchwoman's instinct for which child is still mostly child, and which isn't anymore. Mercy was 3 miles on, a depot-turned antique store whose proprietor had survived at least 2 marriages and 1 recession by believing in the sacredness of dust. The proprietor, a man named Wallace with a cardigan the color of good carpet, did not blink when I said Jasper Thorne. He brought my aunt's trunks once, he said, in '44 in a storm, sat in the kitchen and drank a glass of milk like it was contraband. We kept his napkin because it felt like keeping a piece of something that had made it across a river. He had a shallow case of ticket stubs, one of which had the telltale star tooth. He offered it without theatrics. My wife wanted to make a mobile out of these, he confessed. I told her not to hang the dead over the kitchen table. You were right, Rail Mary said, and for once Wallace accepted being told that. By early afternoon, we had 3 stubs with stars and a coin envelope, a typed note from Mrs. Cray authorizing us to borrow the manifest for educational purposes, and an understanding that people in 2 towns would put out chairs when asked and not try to sell lemonade. We had also collected, without meaning to, the kind of stories people carry like loose change. A woman who felt the draft of a vestibule she couldn't see while sweeping. A man who woke the morning after departure to find a folded letter in his coat pocket addressed to a name he'd been called only by one person, long dead. What now? Ezra asked as we turned off the county road toward the river. The day had reheated. The water made its own weather in the bottomland, a cool damp that remembered accidents without resenting them. Now we take the punch to Harrow Bend and let the river tell us whether we're thieves, I said. You want to give it back? I want to see whether we're supposed to be caretakers or hoarders, I said. There's a difference. One gets you a job, the other gets you haunted. Lawton parked 100 yards short of the washout because trucks and sudden banks have never made a good marriage. We walked with purpose, but not speed. The abutment crouched with its initials and its stubbornness. The wind had a way of coming around the bend and deciding to look at you hard. The water had that late summer smell of tannin and resignation. We laid the towel on the stone like a tablecloth for a meal we had not earned. I unwrapped the punch, the river manifest, the copied photograph of Thorne, and set the Napier and Mercy stubs in a line like breadcrumbs retracing someone else's smart mistake. Jasper Thorne, Rail Mary said, sotto voce, like a woman who has learned to respect neighbors who prefer the night shift. We have some of your things. We can keep them if you need someone to keep them. We can take them back if keeping them makes your job harder. We aren't making a shrine. This the part where the river hands us a program? Lawton asked dryly, but he had his hat off. Countrymen do that at graves and banks that have behaved like them. I didn't expect a sign. I got one anyway. Not thunder, not a silhouette on the far shore, not a headlight slipped in from the wrong century. The air changed temperature by a hair. The leaves on the maples gave one soft backhand clap. A small, precise pressure settled on my ear the way you feel when you get off a plane, before everyone else. And from under the lip of the abutment where the water undercuts the stone, something old and metal nicked daylight. It was not a bell. It was the torn brass rim of one, the part a tongue would have kissed for years. I slid down on my seat and crabbed an arm under, palms to mud, and levered it out. Ezra, to his credit, did not make a sound like victory. He held the towel ready, and I set the rim onto it. It had a crack running 3/4 around, the kind you see when a bell hits a beam for the last time and decides to remember it forever. Inside the rim, none too corroded to make out, the faintest stamp, MNO/C, 1899/JT. Jasper Thorne's bell, Asher said, reverent for the first time in the days I had known him. Or a piece of it. Rim without a tongue, Rail Mary said. We found a tongue without a bell in Napier, and a watch stopped at 12:09, Ezra said, because youth collects proofs as if reality were a game you can win. I set the bell rim on the abutment beside the punch and the little book. "We won't take this," I said to the water, to the man whose photograph knew how to refuse a cigar. "We'll catalog it. We'll put a card on it in Mrs. Cray's room that says loan from the river, and we'll let boys stare at it and girls roll their eyes until it's their turn to come down here and ask whether they have any business keeping other people's artifacts." The pressure in the air lifted, not approval, not permission, just the decency of a hand removed from a shoulder when you've made your point. We rewrapped the punch. We eased the little book back into its oilcloth. We left the bell rim where the stone and silt would decide to keep it or not. On the walk back to the truck, Ezra ranged ahead and then doubled back like a dog, being extremely useful. "If the train runs every 20 years, he said, "how is it we just did a thing?" "We didn't make it run," I said. "We made a room for it to acknowledge that we are not thieves." "That's very church of you," Lawton said. "It's very archive," I said. "Steal nothing. Keep what you can keep. Return what complains." By late afternoon, Hallowfield had begun to practice being ordinary. Marta wrote NO tickets on the chalkboard behind the counter, as if the problem were the sort that could be solved by nouns. Asher pushed the museum case back against the wall and locked it with a key that had learned secrecy. Rail Mary bought a blue candle and a white one from herself and put both in a drawer at home where she couldn't be tempted to decide their meaning before their matches did. I wrote 2 letters before the light failed. One to Lydia at Mercy Fellowship, enclosing a clean copy of the article and a promise to return with a proper archivist when Mrs. Cray felt strong. The other to no one, care of B. Coach, West Window. "You were right to thank me for not telling you what to do. If you want me to call anyone for you, after, before, instead, tell me. If you don't, tell me that, too. A." I left it under the cash drawer. In the morning, if the pouch appeared again, it could decide what category to file that under. Outgoing, incoming, believed. The day ended with Hallowfield remembering to creak like a building that hadn't slept in 20 years. The night came down without a hum. I lay on the motel bed with the tape deck on the nightstand like a reliquary and let the triplet, click, click, tock, run through my head until it turned into the sound of my own heart when it is being honest. Chapter 10. Mercy's Errand. Harrow's Debt. We did the errands that make a story bearable because they turn it into a job. Photocopies on acid-free paper, a call to the state archivist to beg for a humidity-controlled box, a visit to the insurance agent to explain that we had no intention of insuring a haunting. Hallowfield did its chores beside us as if we were synchronization, not disruption. The feed store received pallets of alfalfa with forklift ballet. The school bus made the right squeaks at the right stops. Sheriff Lawton wrote 2 tickets for speeding with apologies and the correct tone. Mid-morning, Mrs. Cray phoned the station in a voice that sounded like she had not slept and did not resent being reminded how. "Bring the book," she said without preamble. "I've cleared a drawer and found a mount. Don't you dare put it in a plastic sleeve. You bring it and we'll breathe on it respectfully and then shut it away where people can ask for it in the right tone." We brought it with the punch wrapped up like contraband under Asher's arm. Ezra walking ahead with righteous teenage purpose, as if physics had assigned him the role of battering ram against bureaucracy. The library smelled like patience. The genealogy crowd kept their heads down while we committed a small sacrament in the corner. Mrs. Cray had made a cradle of felt and foam board, as if she had had a vision at 3 a.m. We laid the manifest open to wayside/402 and slid my copies of the clippings underneath, so they would not bruise the linen. She typed a label with that authority librarians should be paid extra for MNO Conductor's Manifest Special, C. 1905 J. Thorne. On deposit from Hallowfield Station. Please ask to view. Beneath, smaller. No photography without steady hands. Do I put the punch in the case? Asher asked. You put it in your bottom drawer again, she said. And you sleep better, because it's where you can reach it. He nodded, relieved by a bossy woman being right. At noon, I walked to Mercy Fellowship with a pie and a bakery box because promises to church ladies are the kind you keep first. Lydia met me at the thrift rack with a smile that almost reached the back hall. She lifted the lid, inhaled cinnamon, then, businesslike, tucked the box under the counter to be divided fairly after the 12:30 circle of chairs and listening. I lit a candle this morning, she admitted with the mild defiance of a person who knows better and does it anyway.
White.
For the category we don't have a name for. I wrote a letter to the west window and put it under the drawer. I said. Good, she said. He comes for the ones who have already written theirs. Sometimes they still want to be answered. On my way back, I cut down to the river by habit and curiosity. Harrow Bend by daylight is a place where teenagers throw bottles and grown men remember to be polite. I stood with my hand on the same timber and looked for the bell rim we'd left under the abutment lip. It had slid an inch in the night. The river does not prefer to be curated. Good. I took a photograph from 3 angles with my phone and one with a Polaroid because sometimes film believes you more than you believe yourself. Ezra found me there by the sound of swearing at a burr that had made itself family to my sock. He stood with his hands in his hoodie, as if consulting them. I can't stop thinking about the watch at 12:09, he said. If everything stops at the same time, does that make it the right time? Or are we just agreeing to be wrong together? Welcome to adulthood, I said. We call it governance in other rooms. He kicked one small rock into the water, judged the splash too dramatic, and stopped. When it comes back in 20 years, he said, we'll be better. We'll be practiced, I said. Better is a word train schedules don't use. You'll be old, he said, then went scarlet because teenagers have not yet learned how to make that a kindness. I mean, not old, just. I'll be the same number older as you, I said. I'll sit in the back and make faces at you while you pretend not to look. He considered that, and then allowed himself the rare luxury of hope that doesn't apologize for itself. Okay. In the station that afternoon, the pouch appeared again under the cash drawer with a small, theatrical sense of having always belonged. Marta found it when she reached in for quarters, yelped, and did all the little motions women do when a surprise makes you mad and happy at once. Hand to heart, hand to hair, hand to hip for balance. Asher, she called. Post. We gathered with the solemn silliness of people making an occasion because we'd be ashamed not to. Asher untied the thong. Inside, 3 letters. One addressed to a name that made a woman at the back gasp and pressed both palms to her mouth. She took it and slipped into the waiting room like a person accepting a sentence they'd been preparing for since 2005. One addressed simply Rail Mary. And Mary did not pretend she was above crying when she opened it and found a note that said, in the brisk hand of someone who had never written her a letter in life, you are right about the lilies. Use the blue candles. The third in my hand, Avery Quinn. I unfolded it with both practical dread and the wrong kind of excitement, then scolded myself, then read. Avery, the minute was as long as you said it would be, and not enough, and more than enough. I stood on the timber and felt very alive. The train did not flatter me with metaphor. Thank you. If there is a child counting for someone else in 20 years, I hope the string sings less.
N.
No return address, of course. No stamp. The paper smelled like lemon oil and dust, and the inside of coaches where Wills learned to stop apologizing. I wrote back on a card Mrs. Cray kept for occasions that hadn't been classified yet. The string will always sing. That's what chords do when 2 hands share them. There will be chairs. There will be water. If you want the color of paint for the waiting room changed, text me.
A.
I put it under the drawer and shut it as if closing a door on a very polite animal. The pouch was gone by the time we looked again because magic resents being watched do chores. We didn't wait for another sign. We made one. Asher typed up Hallowfield Station protocol, departures, on an old Underwood because civic documents born of grief shouldn't look slick. No tickets. No cameras. Chairs in rows. Water on the counter. Officers posted for safety, not show. Pastor, counselor, or competent and on call. Boy with string optional. Watch the clock. Trust the minute. Don't sell it. He pinned it to a corkboard beside the schedule no one obeys and moved the bench so the sign could be read sitting down. At sunset, I walked the platform alone. I apologized to no one for liking stations at the 1 hour of the day when they aren't ashamed of themselves. The clock stuttered and did its own little penance about being wrong for 20 years. The rails had that ghost gleam they get from their own righteousness. I stood where I had taped the little deck and listened to nothing particular, because some nights nothing is good work. The card in my pocket had softened along the fold. I took it out and read it again, and discovered the second paragraph I had missed, because I am arrogant when I read my own mail. P.S. If you see Thorne, tell him I will not forgive him for the mirrors. Tell him thank you anyway.
L.
At 9:03, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, county code I recognized. Harrow Bend. Come quiet. W. Wallace, the antique man from Mercy. I brought Lawton because 1 lesson per day was enough, and because the river likes men who keep their hats in their hands and their bolt cutters in their trucks. We parked short again and walked the last 100 yards with our feet, trying to be gentle on plants that don't care about our ethics. The bend had taken on that dusk truth. Water black enough to reflect stars that weren't there yet. Bank gray enough to show you where the last flood had been cruel. Wallace stood with his cardigan tighter than the heat required. He didn't wave. He nodded once at the abutment. The bell rim lay where we'd left it. On its cracked lip, something had been placed with more formality than the river allows. The Napier stub, not the copy. The stub itself, the star-punched corner turned toward the bank as if to make a point about edges. Beside it, a card cut from linen, not pulp. On it, in a tidy hand I could have identified in a crowd by now. Deliveries acknowledged. Keep the manifest in rooms with chairs. J. T. Lawton breathed out between his teeth and took off his hat. I am going to be very patient with this county superstition for the rest of my career, he said. Wallace, strangely gentle, said, Thank you. We left the stub where it lay. We took the card. We did not take the bell rim. I wrote loan from the river again in my head, the way people write names in book plates like promises. On the walk back, Lawton asked quietly, You going to publish? I'm going to write it down like a person keeping a ledger and let Mrs. Cray decide what shelf it goes on, I said. If somebody wants to make a show, they can come to the station and try to do it under Asher's eyebrow. And the boy, Ezra? I smiled despite myself. He'll be insufferable for a week, and then he'll be unbearable for a month, and then he'll be the right kind of terrible for 20 years. Good, Lawton said. We need that kind. Back in town, lamps had come on in windows in the respectable way small towns make themselves look less lonely to one another. Marta wiped the counter with a cloth that had not asked for this work, and then did it properly. Rail Mary arranged 2 candles in the shape of a letter that meant nothing and everything. Asher locked the door and turned the sign to closed with a small dramatic flourish he had earned. I went back to the motel with the tape deck under my arm and the linen card in my pocket and the faintage of cinders in my socks. I put the deck on the nightstand and the card on the Bible in the drawer because 2 books can share a room without arguing if you ask them nicely. When I finally slept, I dreamed of a window that wasn't one, and a wayside that didn't ask me to lie, and a conductor who did not forgive me for being glib and thanked me anyway for bringing chairs. The train did not arrive in the dream, because arriving is a different verb than most people think it is. In my sleep, as in Hallowfield, it did what it does best and most terrifyingly. It went on. Chapter 11, The Audit. 3 weeks after the departure, the town learned the difference between becoming a museum and maintaining an archive. Museums have hours. Archives have rules. We printed ours on butcher paper again because the act of writing them large steadied hands and nerves. Hallowfield Station protocol, departures. The same list Asher had typed on the underwood, now lettered by Marta in a schoolteacher's hand and taped above the corkboard. Beneath it, a second sheet, Hallowfield Station protocol, visitors, which was the town's way of saying we appreciate you and we will not let you ruin us. No filming. No interviews on the platform. Chairs, water, windows, lights. If you want spectacle, go to the trestle at noon and watch crows mock you. If you want to help, sit down. The first test arrived wearing lanyards and smiles. A regional reporter with a videographer and a polite producer who promised to respect boundaries without the slightest intention of understanding any. They brought permission slips for the soul. Lon met them at the door like a host who knows where the broom is and puts it in your hand when you start to explain your dietary preferences. "We're not a story," he said. "We're a schedule. We just want to hear what people experienced," the reporter said, sliding her tote toward a chair with a camera-shaped bulge. "There's a human interest angle. People interested in humans are welcome to the reading," Marta said brightly. "We serve coffee. The sign says NO tickets and NO cameras. It means both." Asher said nothing because he had assigned that word to other people today. He took the old conductor's punch from his bottom drawer and set it on the marble with a towel beneath it so it wouldn't leave an oil bloom. Ritual without superstition. Steel that had remembered its job and a manager who remembered his. I came in with a folder under my arm that felt heavier than paper. The county historical had given us a humidity box for the manifest with a kind of side-eye librarians reserved for people who say I don't need a bookmark. I remember where I was. Mrs. Cray had typed a small card to sit beside it when we did show and tell in the station. View by request. Hands off. It was as friendly as a stop sign. We set chairs in rows. We filled paper cups. Rail Mary put her tote of train flowers on the floor and stepped on the handles with both feet to interrupt her own urge to decorate. Ezra took the back row seat by the outlet where the deck would plug in, his hoodie cuffs still shiny with the lesson the line taught them, his posture exaggeratedly bored in the way boys announce, "I am available." We didn't play much. The 10 seconds where the platform tape catches that jointed click-click talk. The bit on the coach where the conductor's tickets, please, comes wrapped in 2 notes that even our grandparents would call polite. A slice of the 9-minute silence that is not silent at all if you were there, if your muscles remember standing when other people stood. The visitors behaved better than their job descriptions and worse than citizens. They listened like they were taking a product home. When the producer lifted her phone to take a still of the punch, Lawton's hand landed, not hard, not friendly, on the case and pushed it 2 inches further away. "Print this," he said, voice flat. "No tickets. Write it big." They went away without having stolen anything obvious. That's how theft looks in counties like ours. Nothing missing. Only a feeling that something has been handled more than it should have. We took attendance afterward, the way we do at funerals. Coffee cups, folded chairs, a list of who had sat where so we would know whom to call if someone started humming Jointed Rail in their sleep. The envelope in my folder had kept its modesty. Manila, clasped, labeled in my own hand in block letters that didn't trust me. A Quinn/ticket. I had carried the thing around like contraband for 3 weeks and a day, careful not to touch it more than necessary, as if too much handling would obligate it to answer questions I had no business asking. I walked to the counter and set the envelope down next to the punch. Asher tilted his head in that faint stationmaster's query that means, "Do you intend to make me part of this?" "Please don't. I will help anyway. It has my name," I said. The stars already punched. I boarded and I stepped off, and the ticket remained a ticket because paper has a long memory for unpaid sentences. "Would you like me to lock it up?" he asked. "I'd like to file it," I said. Correctly. There wasn't a correct way. Archives don't eat confessions. They tuck them in where they can be found without being exposed. I took a clean index card from the stack and printed in the tidy museum hand Mrs. Cray insists on when she has her strength. Quinn, Avery. Declined at Wayside for 02. Below that, smaller, crossed out with respect. I laid my ticket on the card and drew a single diagonal line in soft pencil across my own name. Not an X. Not a signature. A strikeout. The honest kind. The one that says I wrote it. I meant it at the time. I changed my mind. Asher fetched the small ledger we now kept for these. Not the manifest, not Thorne's, ours. We called it Hallowfield Register, Witnesses, because naming a book correctly is a way to teach it how to behave. On the first page, in Bulmer's tidy hand, Bulmer, strange how far certain people travel, how work develops a migratory pattern. Reyes, Marta, stayed. Counted. Asher, Lionel, stayed.
Kept time.
Lawton, S, stayed.
Kept order.
Greeley, Ezra, stayed. Held line. There were others. Now there was me. Quinn, Avery boarded. Stepped off. Wrote it down. I slid the ticket and the card into a Mylar sleeve because I am as susceptible to museum magic as the next sinner, and taped the sleeve to the book's backboard because if anyone was going to steal it, they'd have to work. Ezra, watching, gave a little noise that wasn't approval exactly. It was acceptance. A thing put where it belongs, so that a boy will not have to hold it in his head. Now what? Marta asked, not sarcastic, tired in the useful way. Now we do the ordinary, I said, and the extraordinary will find us when it likes. That afternoon, Mercy Fellowship held their listening circle, 12 chairs, coffee. The saints walk quietly watching. Lydia had hung Jasper Thorne's photograph straight without making it too proud. A woman in a denim jacket read a line from a letter she'd been allowed to keep in her eyes and not her hands. I am not brave. I am finished. We didn't clap. Clapping is a way to make grief into a stage. At dusk, the feed store boy whose truck I had parked near the first day, Raymond Evers' nephew, it turned out, fixed the station's exterior light with the concentration men give to the jobs they can complete. Rail Mary sold 2 blue candles to a girl who had decided she was foolish enough to believe in them and unashamed of it. The town went around putting its nouns back on their shelves. I walked to the trestle because days like that you do a lap. At the center span, hand on the timber that had made a religion of being sturdy, I said, out loud and softly, Mr. Thorne, this is me filing my own name. A breeze came down the water, like a man late to a dinner he had never skipped in his life, and pausing on the porch to wipe his boots. That was the only answer I got, and the only one I deserved. When I turned back toward town, a boy on a BMX pedaled across my reflection in the ditch, coasted without showing off, and disappeared under the bridge. Ezra, by the size and the posture. He didn't wave. He didn't have to. At 9:22, my phone buzzed with a text from a number that had become a noun in its own right. Be coach. West window. There are mirrors in ordinary rooms, too. I am learning to close them.
L. No emoji.
Mercy doesn't use them. I reread it twice, and then put the phone face down on my palm the way you carry a delicate weight from one room to another, without making the weight responsible for your good posture. Back at the station, Asher had put the punch away, the register back in the bottom drawer, the butcher paper protocol back in a tube. He locked the door and flipped the sign to closed, and we stood together for a minute in the vestibule like people who have run a very small theater very well and intend to keep it a civic building. 20 years, he said, not wistful, practical. You going to be here? I asked. He shrugged in that way that means I will, if I am permitted to be the version of myself that made the last one work. I'm teaching Marnie how to scowl at anyone who tries to film. She's excellent. Marnie is terrifying, I said. Thank God, he said, and turned out the lights with a sequence that made the room less lonely rather than more. Chapter 12, Schedules. The county calendar has a way of absorbing miracles by assigning them tasks. Within a week, there were 3 committees: platform logistics, correspondence, and archives. Within a month, the committees had split into the only 2 that matter: people and things. People meant chairs, water, the inconvenient kindness of calling a counselor you don't personally like because they are good at their job. It meant a list on the corkboard of volunteer aunties and uncles who could sit with anyone who needed to hold numbers instead of hands. It meant a short training Lawton developed for deputies who would be asked to stand at either end of the platform without believing they were supposed to be gates. It meant a small jar behind the counter labeled bus money/no questions, because sometimes people did not board the train and still had places to be. Things meant the punch in Asher's bottom drawer and the manifest in its cradle and the Rivers card in a frame labeled on loan from Harrow Bend. It meant a simple glass case, donated by the mayor's wife when she realized she could be useful without making a speech, where Napier's stub and Mercy's were displayed under a typed card that read, "Not for sale." It meant the bell rim staying by the abutment, because some objects behave better when you let them keep the weather. Mercy Fellowship added a rule to their own corkboard: West window requests honored without questions, and a small stack of envelopes addressed only Be Coach. Lydia taught 3 of her circle how to read a letter to a room without turning it into a performance. She hung the photograph of Jasper Thorne so it could see both the rack of cardigans and the door. The county historical printed a handout in 12-point times New Roman because fonts are a kind of truth. The Thorn Special, myth, ledger, and local record. It did not say ghost, it said schedule. It did not say death, it said departure and wayside. Mrs. Cray drew a little map with a dot at 402 and a dotted line called habits. I loved her more than I had the right to. I put off the phone call I owed and then stopped putting it off because schedules cannot be braved by silence. I stood under the eat sign that had regained its third letter and dialed the number of a woman I would like to stop worrying and who, for reasons beyond my competence, had not yet given up. "Hey," she said, the Y catching on a smile I had failed to earn and intended to. "I was about to call you and ask if your train was haunted." "It is," I said, and then, because she had never demanded poetry from me, we made a rule and it respected it. She listened the way people do when they cannot picture your nouns and trust you anyway. When I was done, she said, "I like chairs and water. I like the part where you didn't make yourself central." I climbed aboard, I admitted. I stepped off. I filed my own name. "That's all any of us get," she said. "A minute, a file, and somebody in the room who knows where both are kept." "Come up," I said, because I am slow and sometimes do the brave thing late. "I'll show you the trestle at the hour when it decides to be affectionate." "I will," she said. "I'll bring pie for the librarian and a towel for the bell." The pouch under the cash drawer behaved like weather that likes being predictable. Every few mornings it appeared with one, sometimes two letters, careful hands, ink that behaved itself, lemon oil in the paper. We didn't read the ones not ours. We learned as a town to touch the envelope only by its edges and to breathe through our mouths while we handed it to the person who had been called to the window. Rail Mary started dating each delivery on a 3x5 and keeping a little binder labeled out / in like a librarian. It was her best self. We took the on loan card down to the river once, held it up so the bell rim could see we had taken our duty seriously, and decided that was enough theater for a decade. Ezra counted the stairs to the trestle, the ties to the abutment, the breaths it took to stop listening for the triplet in your teeth. He began to ride his bike less recklessly and more purposefully. Marnie, terrifying Marnie, learned the station keys and how to scowl at men who confuse concern for ownership. Asher began to let his jaw unclench 2 hours earlier each day. Lon developed a new habit of taking off his hat at the door, even in buildings where he had previously left it on, because he had learned what rooms deserve. One last thing arrived the day before I left, a small parcel with no postmark, wrapped in paper the color of the inside of closets. Inside, a folded square of linen with M&O in the corner and the familiar smell of lemon and dust. When I opened it, a single scrap of card fell out, the same linen stock as Thorne's manifest. Written on it in a neat hand, "You told me to report. Wayside held. Mirrors obeyed.
Keep time.
J.T." It was not apology and not approval. It was a conductor's acknowledgement. Received. We put it in the case next to the Rivers card and the 2 stubs and the label that says not for sale. I walked to mile 402 alone at dusk. The plank flexed under my weight like a memory remembering not to give. I tucked a copy, not the original, of my own ticket into the crack between the boards and the post where others before me have jammed sticks and decisions. I wrote on it in pencil, in the same tidy hand I forced myself to use when we filed the card at the station. Quinn, Avery, declined with respect. The cinders took my feet without ceremony. A nightjar sawed the dark. The Trilene accepted what I'd brought without ever planning to return it. On the way back, I met Lydia bringing a grocery bag full of paper cups because she does not believe in running out. We walked the last stretch together, 2 women who understand that the only way to make a machine behave is to give it something better to do. "You'll come back?" she asked, not pleading. People who run rooms don't plead, they schedule. "In 20 years?" I said. "Sooner," she said, and smiled because she is forgiven for wanting the quick kindness and not just the long ones. "I'll come when the west window writes," I said, or when the town needs someone petty enough to argue with a reporter without losing a word of the rule.
Good, she said.
"Bring pie." We reached the station as Asher was flipping the sign and Lawton was removing a stapled notice about a charity 5K someone had dared to put on the door without authorization. Rail Mary had placed 2 candles, one white, one blue, on the counter, unlit, and written on a small card between them for the minute. I stood with my palm on the marble and felt the faintest vibration. Compressors, a truck 2 streets over, Hallowfield being Hallowfield. The station clock was wrong again in what passes for its ordinary, cheerful lie.
Good.
Let it be wrong for 19 years and 11 months and 3 weeks and 6 days. Let it learn to be precise only when precision is an act of mercy. Before I left, I slid the register out of the bottom drawer and added a last line in my cleanest hand. Hallowfield as a town Saturday. Counted.
Kept time.
I put the pen back in the jar the way men put tools back correctly when they have learned they are not alone in the shop. On the road out of town, the water tower made its usual claim. The rails shone in that way rails do when they are idle and intend to remain that way, and the trestle looked older by an hour and younger by a decision. I texted the woman who brings pie and towels and told her I was coming down the highway with cinders in my shoes. She wrote back what you hope to get once and then spend the rest of your life earning. Okay.
On.
The train will leave again. The clock will honor it. A manifest will open, and a neat hand will write names with respect. There will be a minute. There will be a wayside. There will be chairs and water and windows and lights. There will be a boy holding a line and a woman counting for him. There will be a station master with a punch he keeps where men keep their courage. There will be a town that refuses to be a story and insists on being a schedule. And it will go on. Epilogue, Wayside, after. The town kept its promise to the rails by practicing ordinary until ordinary learned to trust us again. We put the punch back in Asher's bottom drawer, the manifest in its cradle at the library, the bell rim where the river wanted it, and the rules where people could see them. Chairs, water, windows,
Lights.
no tickets.
No cameras.
We called it an archive, because that word makes a room behave. A season passed. The pouch under the drawer appeared and disappeared like good weather, leaving notes nobody had the right to, addressed in hands that smelled like dust and lemon oil. Sometimes a sentence arrived that was nothing but a date and 2 initials. Sometimes 3 pages steady as a timetable, because grief likes to finish what it starts when you give it a desk. I went back to my life in pieces. Cases that preferred wires to miracles, reports that needed verbs more than adjectives. The work felt smaller, then truer. Some nights I woke to the polite 3-beat in my teeth, click, click, talk, and counted until it turned into the sound my own heart makes when it remembers it doesn't have to be brave to be honest. When I missed Hallowfield, I texted Marta a single word on, and she sent back a photograph of the chalkboard with NO tickets underlined twice, or a pie cooling on the sill, or Ezra teaching a new kid how to set the brake on the line like a grown man pretending not to be proud of himself. Asher retired the following spring in a ceremony he tried to dodge and failed to. Marnie took the keys with a scowl that would keep saints out after hours, which is what the job requires. Lawton learned to take off his hat at more doors. Rail Mary stopped selling train-shaped flowers and started handing out blank cards that said "Be Coach" in the corner and nothing else. Mercy Fellowship added a second row of chairs and a rule: no applause. Say thank you. The county engineer replaced 2 culverts upriver and left Harrow Bend alone on purpose. Lena wrote twice more. Be Coach. West window. I am learning the kind of silence that doesn't turn into a mirror. Then, months later, 402 is everywhere if you let it be. Grocery lines, bus stops, kitchens. 1 minute long, exactly as promised. Tell Ezra I prefer the white candles for indecision, the blue for decision, though he shouldn't let me boss him. I didn't write back each time. Sometimes keeping the drawer shut is respect. On a wet Tuesday, Lydia from Mercy called me while I was taking photographs of a crossing that preferred to lie. He left something, she said, throat thick and practical. At the Saints' Walk, beneath Jasper Thorne's photograph, someone had slid a folded square of linen into the frame. Deliveries acknowledged. The card inside read in a neat, patient hand.
Keep time. No apology. No blessing.
A conductor's sentence. Years do what they do. Teach people how to take their turns at keeping the minute. We train teenagers to count without clutching and middle-aged men to stand at the platform ends without believing themselves gates. We taught the station clock when to tell the truth and forgave it the rest of the time. Once, in a July heat that made the rails insanely proud of themselves, the signal bungalow blacked out for 9 seconds at 3:15 in the afternoon with no train due in any sense. Asher came down in his lawn shoes and wrote block dark, 009 practice, in the log and laughed once in a way that healed a season. Every so often, Harrow Bend gave back a small, stubborn noun the river had finished with. The brass tongue of a bell, a watch that would only ever say 1209. The rim we left, slid an inch and gleaming like a coin we refused to spend. We cataloged what we kept and returned what complained. We added a typed card to the case in the library, on loan from the river, and learned how to mean it. When 20 years had almost learned to spell themselves, I came back to stay a while. Ezra was a different geometry by then. Boy turned man in a hoodie he should have retired, and a posture that said back row, eyes open. Marnie had put in O tickets in 3 languages just to save herself explaining. Marta had added muffins to the chalkboard because kindness wants nouns too. The water tower had let the blue go chalkier. The crows had acquired opinions about our process. We set out chairs without counting whether there were enough. We placed cups and wrote names on masking tape so hands wouldn't shake over introductions. We dusted the punch and didn't display it. We checked the latch on the window by the west bench because it has a way of rattling when a sentence is about to be said in a voice that matters. Rail Mary set a white candle near her tote and didn't light it. She has learned restraint like a craft. At dusk, the clock took its deep, embarrassed breath and hurried to catch up with itself. The rails hummed under my shoes with the decency of something heavy doing exactly as much as it needs to, and not 1 ounce more. The trestle went still the way old things do, when they want the young to stop showing off. And the headlight, a warm, domestic light without modern arrogance, came around the curve as if it knew the names of everyone who had ever watched it arrive. I won't write that night's names. They belong to a page in a linen book that understands consent. I will write that the mirror came and went, and we held the silence like trained people, and the wayside appeared, mile 402, exactly long enough for those who needed it, and that the minute proved itself again. Not enough and somehow plenty. Ezra counted, and did not clutch. Marnie stood her post. Lawton said 1 syllable under his breath, and then decided not to say it louder. Marta put a cup into a shaking hand, and kept her own steady. Lydia bowed her head in respect for a man who keeps time better than any sermon. And I, older, no wiser, finally willing to be incidental, stood at the west window with my palm on the cool glass and filed the only report I had any right to file. Present. Witness.
Kept time.
After, the town didn't celebrate. It stacked chairs and washed cups and wrote thank you on 3 envelopes and put them under the drawer. Asher, invited back for the weekend so the building could smell like his patience, stood at the ticket window with a punch under his hand and breathed like a man who had spent a life telling clocks when to tell the truth.
He nodded at me.
I nodded back. We were done for the night. I walked to the trestle alone. The river was loyal to gravity and disinterested in me. The triplet lived faintly in the timber under my palm. Maybe rail, maybe heart. I said out loud, to whoever minds these things, we had chairs. We had water. We kept the minute. The wind, decent, didn't answer. Good machines don't require applause. On the drive out at dawn, my phone buzzed once. B coach. West window. Still learning. Still on.
N.
No punctuation to confuse the facts. I didn't write back. I put the phone face down and watched the road and let the rails, far off, keep their own schedule. If you need a moral, you'll be disappointed. The best we found is a procedure. Chairs, water, windows,
Lights.
a clock that tells the truth when asked, a ledger that writes names with respect and crosses them out with the same, a town that refuses to be a story and insists on being a schedule, and a minute, always exactly 1, long enough to decide whether to go on and kind enough to let you step down. That's the work. We'll keep doing it. The train will, too.